Recording in progress.
Welcome, everyone. I now call the September 5th, 2023 regular City Council meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The City of Bothell is now providing the option of attending council meetings remotely or in person. Public comment will be allowed both in writing or verbally. Verbal comments may be taken either in person or remotely. Sign-up sheets were provided online by the City Clerk's office via link from the agenda. A call-in phone number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to listen live to the meeting. If you have called in, we ask that you mute your device. If a participant fails to mute their connection and causes a disruption to the meeting, the connection will be terminated. At this point, we will take a moment to take roll call of the council members by position number. Please say here when the City Clerk calls your name. City Clerk.
Thank you. Councilmember Zorns?
Here.
Mayor Thompson?
Here.
Councilmember Alders?
Here.
Councilmember McNeil?
Here.
Councilmember Mankey?
Here.
Councilmember Dodd?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Alcabra?
Here.
All present, Your Honor.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines. For remote meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently, and mute your microphone when not speaking. Next up is meeting agenda approval. Agenda item 2C, the Snohomish County Council District 4 update has been postponed to a later date. Are there any other changes to the agenda? Seeing none, we will move on to presentations, reports, and briefings with public engagement opportunities. We have a Regional Crisis Response Agency visioning sessions. We can provide input about future crisis response services on September 11th, 13th, or 14th. There's a comp plan transportation survey. You can shape future transportation in Bothell by taking a short survey by September 30th at engagebothell.com. And you can become a volunteer salmon watcher. Help UTA Bothell collect information about spawning salmon. All right, next up, we have a proclamation for National Suicide Prevention Week. Whereas September 10th through 16th, 2023 is known around the United States as National Suicide Prevention Awareness Week and is intended to help promote awareness and increase public understanding of suicide risk and prevention efforts. And whereas Suicide Prevention Week provides the opportunity to educate our community about the warning signs for suicide and how to reach out and connect those experiencing an emotional crisis with local evidence-based resources. And whereas suicidal thoughts can affect anyone, regardless of age, gender, race, orientation, income level, religion, or background. And whereas according to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, in 2021, more than 48,183 people died by suicide, which is approximately 132 people per day. And whereas suicide is the 10th leading cause of death among adults in the United States, and whereas among children between the ages of 15 and 19, suicide is the second leading cause of death and the leading cause of death for 14 to 15-year-olds, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And whereas in Bothell, we choose to publicly support one another through compassionate listening and referring to support agencies and resources, such as the 988 line, Regional Crisis Response Agency, Center for Human Services, and National Alliance on Mental Health Illness, all of whom are on the front lines of a battle to open minds, save lives, and restore hope. And whereas knowing the signs of suicide and encouraging community members to reach out to resources are necessary and life-saving actions. And whereas we can all help prevent suicide and work to end the stigma around getting help. And now therefore I, Mason Thompson, Mayor of the City of Bothell, do hereby proclaim September 10th through 16th, 2023 as Suicide Prevention Week in the City of Bothell, and encourage all community members to recognize the signs of suicide risk and learn how to connect themselves and their loved ones to local community resources for suicide prevention. And I believe we have Era Real from the Center for Human Services here to accept. This is for you, but I haven't signed it yet, so I'm going to go do that. And if you want to say a few words, we would love that.
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
thank you so much to the City of Bothell for, one, inviting me here today, and I'm accompanied by Jenna, who is our mental health manager over in our Bothell location, and I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you so much. This is a very hard topic. This isn't easy. And I think that the city, in and of itself, just by making this proclamation, is taking the first steps towards destigmatizing and encouraging folks to reach out. Like, we are here in your community, and we have a couple of flyers over here as well for folks who are interested. And I also wanted to promote that on Saturday, September 16th, there will be a free event at the Linwood Event Center called Creating Hope and Resiliency. And they will actually be having a community conversation with Kevin Hines, who is a Golden Gate Bridge jump survivor. And it's open to the community it's all ages. And I highly encourage folks to please come out. I have some flyers over here. And come and attend this free community event. And also just, it's a lot. And this is an incredibly sad and incredibly heavy topic. So again, like, the first step is to destigmatizing. The first step is to continue talking about it. And the first step is to reach out when you need help. We are here in your community. Your neighbors are here in the community. And I want to say thank you so much to the City of Bothell for continuing to advocate for human services and for the well-being, the entire holistic well-being of your community members, both Snohomish and King County residents. So thank you so much. And now I'll hand it over to Jenna to talk a little bit more about our services here in Bothell.
Hi, I'm Jenna. I'm the mental health manager at our Bothell location. I'm just grateful for the support that you guys have given, and I'm excited to continue serving the community and just being a part of the suicide awareness in any capacity. I know taking the first step can be hard, but we are still accepting clients, and we're welcome to figuring out whatever is needed to support. So that's all.
One more like plug. If you are a Bothell resident, please reach out to Center for Human Services. We are offering free mental health services in our offices, and we also offer free school-based mental health therapy at Skyview Middle School and Bothell High School. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us, and we will do our best to help assist you and to help you out. So please reach out, Center for Human Services. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you for the plug. I'm really happy you guys are here too. All right, next up we have the City Manager report. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Council, and greetings to all who are here. I think many are here in support of the proclamation, so thank you for your time this evening. Just a couple of quick notes as we head back into action here, and after having a month off in the month of August. I hope everyone was able to recharge and hit some of the great events in our community too. I know with Summer Nights we also had Sustainamania, which was very we were back into full strength and was quite an event. It was a great day, as well as I know the Chamber recently held an event as well for summer. So it was hot, it was smoky, but that's what we do. So good to see everyone. One quick thing just to get on people's awareness for the fall is looking ahead at our council meetings. We do our best to adjust when there's potential conflicts or changes. And just this is an early heads up so we can be planning at the staff level. We have 2 meetings that I'm proposing that we would cancel. One of them is the first Tuesday of November, which is also an election night, so November 7th. And then as well as we do have the option of meeting 3 times in December. But as we look at the projected calendar, I believe we can plan on taking December 19th off. What we typically do in this situation then too is just letting you know, and then our clerk's office will, as they contemplate the schedule of getting all the topics that we need to work through before their year is up, we'll make sure that all the pieces fit in all the right places. And as we get closer to those events, we'll send out an official cancellation. But wanted to at least get that out publicly so people can be planning their evenings, and we'll communicate if anything changes. The only other thing that I'll note is, as you mentioned at the top of the meeting, that we are not having the update from Councilmember Mead, but we have heard from his office, and I think we're looking at a date in November, obviously not November 7th, but we'll work with them to find a date that works and hear what's happening in our district at the county level. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Council Committee reports. Councilmember Alders.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a couple. One is from the AWC Legislative Priorities Committee. We last met on July 27th, and we talked about various legislative priorities, and it seemed to really come around infrastructure, policing, public safety, and behavioral health. So a lot of the topics that we're talking about here in Bothell are being talked about at the state level as well. The next update is from the Regional Crisis Response Principals Assembly. It was in our public engagement opportunities this week as well, but just another way to speak up and say that the community visioning meetings are taking place at Shoreline City Hall on September 11th, at Kirkland City Hall on September 13th, and a virtual meeting on Zoom on September 14th. That I also put that information out in my newsletter. So those are upcoming events from Racer. Thank you.
All right, seeing no more, we will move on to visitor comment. The city has accepted visitor comment in writing as well as accepted sign-up sheets for those who wish to speak at tonight's meeting. Written comments submitted to the city clerk no later than 3 p.m. today were forwarded to all city council members and are part of the record. When the clerk calls your name, you will have 3 minutes to speak. Please note that council will receive your input, but on the advice of our city attorney, we do not engage in discussion of these topics. Staff will make note of items requiring follow-up. City clerk?
Thank you, Mayor Thompson. We received 2 written comments. The first one from Kristen Bell, who wrote regarding NORCOM dispatching police for the city of Bothell. And then we received, Mark Swanson wrote regarding tire dust toxins and cited the Washington code. And then we have 3 people signed up for live comment. Before I call on those people, I'd like to remind commenters that while you may speak to whatever comment you choose, we ask that if you are a council candidate, you do not use this time to speak to your own campaign. With that, I'll call on our first speaker, which is Andrew Nelson. Thank you, Andrew. When you come up, you'll have 3 minutes to speak, and we'll set the timer.
Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and City Council. I'm here to speak tonight on the proclamation Councilor member Jenny Aldrich wrote for Suicide Awareness Week. There's no doubt mental health is something Bothell should and does take seriously. I'll need to tell everyone here a personal story regarding my Uncle Mark. I never had the opportunity to meet my Uncle Mark. He committed suicide February 14th, 1990, 7 years before I was born. Mark was a special guy. He loved birds, he loved our crows. He was a hardworking, dedicated person. Mark was also a gay man who struggled with accepting his sexuality, which was a major reason he took his own life. A couple of years ago, and you guys accepted, and I was so happy, we raised the pride flag every June in celebration of Pride Month. And every time we do that, I think of Mark. And it means the world to me. I want everyone in Bothell to know that they are supported, no matter what they're going through. Another personal story that happened in the city of Bothell was my father's passing. July 2nd, 2012, my father committed suicide in our city. I'm telling you this because all of you know me to some extent. I've talked before and you all know me, and I just want to make clear that being a surviving family member of someone who commits suicide can happen to anyone, even your neighbor, even me. The more we talk about mental health, the less stigmatized it becomes. And that's why I'm so proud to be here today and tell my story, tell my family story. Let's continue to practice kindness because that is the Bothell way. Thank you, Mayor Thompson, for signing this proclamation, and Councilmember Aldrich for writing this, and thank you, City Council and City staff for listening.
Thank you. Next, we have Jacob Tate. Oh, wait, he's virtual. Sorry about that. He's on his way. Jacob, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead when you're ready. You'll have
Okay.
3 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen of the City Council, I stand before you today as a tenant residing in Bothell, Washington, seeking your help in addressing a pressing issue that affects not only my community, but many other apartment complexes in our city and across the entire state of Washington. This issue resolves around what I believe is a profiteering scam instituted by landlords in the form of a mandatory valet removal garbage fee. Our landlord has contacted a third-party valet garbage removal service and is imposing a mandatory fee, which was not mentioned in our lease, upon tenants, a fee which I have no choice but to pay. My concern regarding this situation is twofold. Firstly, this fee translates into a substantial increase of $300 to $400 in our annual housing costs, a significant financial burden for many of us. Secondly, it raises concerns about the public health and sanitation conditions within our building, as our garbage will regularly line the hallways. The existing housing code, unfortunately, does not provide any enforcement mechanism to restrict landlords from charging tenants for a service they might not even want, such as transferring trash from our unit to the trash collection area while restricting our access to it. What is deeply concerning is that the landlords appear to be profiting from these fees rather than charging tenants more than the actual cost by the third-party provider. In essence, our trash has become a source of revenue for them. These mandatory fees are collected from the tenants and are used to increase the net operating income and property values for landlords. This was reported as a business model in Property Manager Insiders back in May 2021 under the article titled, "What to Expect When Adding Valet Trash Services to an Apartment Complex." What is even more alarming in this situation potentially sets a precedent for landlords to exploit their responsibilities in maintaining communal premises as outlined in city and state housing codes. The lack of specificity in these codes opens the door for landlords to impose additional fees beyond the rental rates, such as house cleaning, pest control, and landscaping services. It's not hard to see how these scenarios could place undue financial burdens on tenants like us. I come to you today with a humble request. I ask for your support in convening a review session to discuss residents' concerns about valet garbage services. Renters could constitute a vulnerable and growing group in the community, and we require protections from unsavory business practices which exploit us financially. Our goal is to create a fair housing market where every tenant is treated equitably, and the decisions you make as City Council can have a significant impact on the lives of those who reside within rental properties in our city. Let us work together to ensure tenants' rights are protected and that we foster a community that values fairness. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Tate. Next, we have Mark Swanson.
Greetings, everybody. So the tire dust issue, you know, I probably sent maybe 25, 30 links to Planning Commission and you guys, but, you know, no one's ever reached out to me and asked me anything about it, not a single time. So I'm never sure if you guys have actually read them or considered them. I don't know. Because this is such an important issue to me, I wanted to make it clear tonight something about the tire dust so that we have full understanding in hopes that we can create a neutral playing field where we can dialogue and come together and understand how serious this problem is. Tire dust has a preservative in it. And when the tire dust lands on the street or on permeable soil, the tire preservative outgasses. But the tire preservative has two forms. First is when it's just lying out in the open, sun's beating down on the tire dust, and it releases a high volatile gas, which dissipates throughout the atmosphere. And the chemistry of the atmosphere essentially degrades it. It's really quite harmless. The other form of this tire preservative occurs when it contacts with water. And rainwater and snowmelt contain ozone. And the ozone transforms this preservative in the tire dust into a low volatile. That means it doesn't evaporate. It's water soluble. And it kills coho at only 0.05 million parts. Now, when we have these stormwater basins that collect the tar dust, it goes in the stormwater basins, it settles down, it's in the bottom, there's no oxygen, there's no sun, there's no UV light, but there is ozone. This system is an ecological time bomb because it guarantees the maximum potential release of 6-ppd quinone into the watershed. We can't deal with this on a parcel by parcel approval. I want to call your attention to Washington Administrative Code 365-195-915, criteria for including the best available science in developing policies and development regulations. What this essentially says, you don't get to just throw stuff over the fence to SEPA.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. Your time is up.
I'd like to request 2 more minutes.
No.
Why is that?
All right, moving on to projected agenda discussion.
I'm sorry, the Bothell City Rules states I can request more time.
And I give you an answer, Mr. Swanson. Public comment is over. Like I said, we don't normally engage with people on public comment. I need you to sit down.
Okay.
Thank you. Mayor Thompson, I'm not sure if there's anybody else in the audience who wishes to speak, so I'm going to ask if anybody is in the audience that wishes to speak, please step to the podium, state your name. And if there's anyone in the audience, please use, or in the virtual audience, please use the raise hand function. I'm not seeing anyone. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up is projected agenda discussion. Council? All right, seeing none, I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda. Councilmember Dodd?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All right, I've got a motion from Councilmember Dodd and a second from Councilmember Mankey to approve the consent agenda. Would anybody like to speak to the motion? Seeing none, City Clerk?
Please say yes or no when I call your name. Councilmember Zorns?
Yes.
Mayor Thompson?
Yes.
Councilmember Alderks?
Yes.
Councilmember McNeil?
Yes.
Councilmember Mankey?
Yes.
Councilmember Dodd?
Yes.
And Deputy Mayor Alcabra?
Yes.
Passes 7-0.
Thank you. All right. Our first agenda bill of the night is Agenda Bill 23128, Shoreline Management Code Amendments. City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. And making their way to the table tonight are our senior planner, Dave Boyd, and then a consultant, Amy Sumi. Excuse me, Amy. You'll remember Amy was with us along with Dave in support of a study session back on May 9th. And we're returning this evening with the public hearing, as you said. So tonight's primary purpose is, again, just that, is to hear from the public. And then after closing the public hearing, if council has any questions, we'll have that. I do want to note, and we've had discussions today too, is that that while in the agenda bill and on the plan or the tracker is to bring this back to council next week for action, just like any public hearing, if there's any questions raised or anything that then the council following it would like to have answered prior to taking action, we can always update that. So just for clarity, public hearings themselves have to get noticed, and once they're noticed, it's takes a little bit of a procedure or time to move the public hearing itself. Action following, we have some flexibility. So just wanted to put that context forward as we prepare to hear a little bit of a reminder from May 9th on this brief staff report, and then hear from the community. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave for further introductions.
And I'm going to open the public hearing so I can't forget later.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're happy tonight to bring to you the Shoreline Board recommendations for 2023 2022, 2023 code amendments to the shoreline management regulations. Before I turn this over to Amy for the presentation, I did want to acknowledge the email that I sent you today and 2 exhibits that were inadvertently left out of the packet. One from Ann Agard, who submitted her exhibit 1, at the October 17th Shoreline Board meeting. And the second was comments from the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife that were made since the study session as part of the SEPA review. So those have been distributed and will be in the packet for when this comes back to you for action, so that the record will be complete. With that, I'm going to pass it off to share my screen and then have Amy go through a brief presentation here. Okay.
All right. Thank you. So as Dave mentioned, I'm just going to go through a very quick presentation. It's very similar to what you already saw and heard about on May 9th, so I will keep it brief. I think I just excised a few slides and added one new one to address a question that was raised during the May 9th meeting. So first off, just a quick history of the Shoreline Master Program, that it was last comprehensively updated a decade ago now. In 2013, and since that time there was a periodic update in 2019, and then now we're at our second periodic update since that last comprehensive update. And since that time also there were a couple of updates to Chapter 1404, which is the critical areas regulations that apply outside of shoreline jurisdiction, and that is kind of one of the bases for some of the revisions and amendments that are proposed in the packet that you have, is just to keep consistent as much as possible with those other critical areas regulations, so we don't have 2 different standards in the different areas of the city. And so the basis for the proposed amendments is rooted in the Shorelines Board request from the last update to take a look at buffer reduction options, particularly for single-family residential development. Again, just recent updates to Chapter 1404, critical areas regs, wanting to be consistent as much as it is practicable. Other ecology updates to best available science. There was some legal action related to a WSDOT project, and that resulted in some hearing examiner recommendations, which we addressed in the proposed amendments. And then there was just kind of some other non-substantive kind of housekeeping changes. And I'm just going to mention a few of the things that kind of brought out the most discussion during the Shorelines Board discussion, just for a reminder. One of the big topics was that we changed a prohibited fill in floodplain areas in the natural environment from prohibited to conditional use, but only in certain circumstances. And those are related particularly to, well, ecological function improvements, which was the case before, but now also any necessary improvements to existing transportation corridors that are necessary to increase safety, catch up to current standards, those types of things. And so it's not a yes, it's just an opportunity to pursue that improvement and through the conditional use route and demonstrate that you're consistent with quite a long list of criteria in order to ultimately be approved. And the conditional use also not only requires city approval, but it requires Department of Ecology approve it after the city. So quite a lot of review is involved in that change. A next kind of big topic was what to do about wetland buffers. So ultimately, after a lot of discussion, the city decided, or the Shorelines Board decided, that it wanted to stick with the 4-tiered, 4-bucket kind of system that's laid out on the screen, with 3 to 4 points, 5, 6 to 7, and 8 to 9 habitat points, rather than go with Department of Ecology's latest recommendation, which divides it into 3 buckets. the Shoreline Board just felt that this 4-bucket system provides greater and more appropriate protection to wetlands within shoreline jurisdiction. But we did make a few other changes just to kind of match the format of the critical areas regs, and so be consistent in that respect, having a table that shows the buffers both with and without minimization measures. So that change was made as well. And then the shoreline buffer reduction option, again, was another topic with a lot of discussion. And as it evolved, a decision was made by the board to recommend that it be removed as a potential pathway for a new development in the shoreline residential and high-intensity environments, but it is retained as a potential pathway of kind of flexibility for substantial redevelopment of already developed lots in the shoreline residential and high-intensity environment. We did a lot of analysis to look at how many folks that could potentially affect, and we found that there's not a lot of new development potential in those environments of undeveloped lots. It's more substantial redevelopment scenarios that we were looking at and anticipating. And that kind of plays into this last slide, which is a new one. The question was raised about how middle housing ADU regulations, which I think are still upcoming, how that kind of looks in shoreline jurisdiction. And so kind of bottom line is that the critical areas regulations and these buffers are still in play, even with the middle housing and ADU requirements to accommodate those types. But there are a number of tools, which we've mentioned a couple of already in the regulations, that allow lateral expansions, certain waterward expansions, redevelopment with enhancement, those types of things. And so those same tools would be available to the ADU or middle housing proposals to enable them to move forward. It doesn't mean, though, that because we do have these buffers and we do have mechanisms for modifying existing development, but they won't necessarily be able to accomplish all of the things that they might have envisioned within the constraints of the Shoreline Master Program. But there's room for ADUs, there's room for middle housing within shoreline jurisdiction, I think was the bottom line. And that was all I had to present tonight.
So I'm going to stop sharing here. So at this point, council may conduct the public hearing, open public testimony, and take public testimony, and then a decision on whether you're ready to take action next week as proposed or need more time. I'm going to stop sharing and check. I wanted to acknowledge that we were anticipating being joined by the vice chair of the Shoreline Board, when they made the recommendations last October. He is not here among the attendees, but we do have David Bain is here as an attendee. Raylan Santiago from the Department of Ecology, our shoreline planner, is also here if needed to answer any questions, and Shoreline Board member Ann Agard is here in person.
All right, so we're open for questions from council.
If there are questions, and public testimony.
Councilmember Zorns?
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I just would like to ask if we could take public testimony first, because that's what this item is for.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to ask that we do that first, if that's okay. With that, I will say that I do not show anybody signed up to speak to this item, but if there's anybody in the audience that wishes to do so, please use the raise hand function if you're virtual, and if you're not, please step to the podium. You'll have 3 minutes.
Before I begin, I'd like to ask for a 2-minute extension on the 3 minutes again.
This is to the public hearing for the Shoreline Code Amendment.
It's complicated, and I'm requesting 2 minutes in addition to 3 minutes for Bothell Municipal Code.
Is this a question I answer, or is this a question you answer?
I believe it's up to the chair if you would like to allow that.
No.
Would the chair mind providing a reason?
I don't see the need, Mr. Swanson, but you have 3 minutes.
It's a complicated matter. I'll take my 3 minutes.
Mr. Swan, I will say Mr. Swanson submitted written comment regarding his topic, and that was submitted to the council, and it will be part of the public record, so.
Thank you, City Clerk.
Yeah.
Washington Administrative Code, criteria for including the best available science in developing policies and development regulations. This is state law. You're held to this. Number 1, to demonstrate that the best available science has been scheduled in the development of critical areas, policies, and regulations, counties and cities should address each of the following on the record. A, the specific policies and development regulations adopted to protect the functions and the values of the critical areas at issue. The relevant sources of best available scientific information included in the decision making. That's you guys. That's not SEPA. Any non-scientific information, including legal, social, cultural, economic, and political information, uses a basis for critical area policies and regulations that depart from recommendations derived from the best available science. A county or city departing from science-based recommendations should: 1, identify the information on the record that supports its decision to depart from science-based recommendations. 2, identify potential risks to the functions and values of the critical areas or areas at issue with any additional measures chosen to limit such risks. State Environmental Policy Act review often provides an opportunity for you to establish and publish the record of this assessment. This clearly stipulates you don't get to throw your decision over the fence to SEPA and call it good. I'm not going to read the rest of it. I provided you the Washington Administrative Code. I don't know what science you could possibly point to reduce setbacks in the shoreline management area, particularly given the fact of the potential sunsetting of the Shorelines Board. I'm not even sure the legality of this. The GMA and your requirement to follow the comprehensive plan talks about environment, particularly those sensitive to development when mixed with human activity. I think the coho salmon dying before making it 2 blocks up our salmon streams constitutes that. I'd like to remind the council that I sent you the science. These inner city buses put out 200 times the tire dust as an automobile. Last time I looked, Bothell buses in the inner city aren't carrying 200 people now, are they? I guess that's it for me. I've got more to say.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. Your time's up.
But my time is up.
Is there anybody else in the audience that wishes to speak? Ms. Agard, if you'd make your way to the podium. And again, if anybody's in the virtual audience, please use the raise your hand function.
Yes, good evening. I'm Ann Agard, and yes, I've been a member for a number of years of the Shoreline Board. I would like to just mention a couple of quick things regarding this. The first is that, are you okay?
I was going to say that was the fastest 3 minutes ever.
Regarding middle housing and accessory developments, what the board had asked was that we as a board have an opportunity to sit down and discuss this with you. And we have yet to have that opportunity, despite the fact that we passed these regulations from the board last October. We're now up to just about a year. And when we passed this and asked our staff to send this recommendation that we meet with you to discuss this, we anticipated it hopefully would be in January before our terms had expired. And unfortunately, that did not happen. But I just want to point out that it was a unanimous decision by the board. I also want to say that we are extremely congenial board. We work well together. We appreciate our expertise that we have regarding the shorelines. And I hope that you see that coming through the decision before you. So a few things I want to emphasize. One is that in your packet, you have these wonderful colored maps that I know when you first look at them, they look rather difficult to interpret, but after a while, they do make a lot of sense. And one of the things that's clear, if you read the little notations that Amy did, which we asked for when we were looking at these alternative buffers, and which played into this request about the middle housing, was that you see there is indeed very few areas where there can be development that is not outside of the buffers, because often along the streams there are wetlands there. And related to that, I want to point out that there is only one property that might be affected by this development. And that one property actually requested a rezone during this comprehensive plan update. And the city denied that request because they did not feel it would fit with the property. This is a piece of property that's actually adjacent to and owned by Security Gun Club. And the John Fowler, who represents them, said he could not develop the property with the current zoning and regulations. So this again speaks to the fact he would have had the opportunity to have applied this buffer reduction, and he did not request it or pursue it.
Thank you, Ms. Agard. Your time is up.
Thank you. So thank you for your strong consideration of this. And I am available, as is Jim Orr and David Bain, for any questions you have from the board.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak regarding this topic? I don't see anybody.
Thank you. All right. Council.
Mayor?
Yes.
Just a quick reminder to close the public hearing.
I'm going to close the public hearing and then ask for comment, not vice versa?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing and then ask council if they have any questions. Councilmember Zorns?
Well, I hope people's creative question juices are flowing. I do appreciate, I want to thank the Shoreline Board for, how many times did I notice that you had met? 6 times? So my thanks to everyone who put the time in and gave this a lot of thought. And it comes with a lot of confidence, which on the council receiving end of it, so very much appreciated. So thank you. And you also brought up a very good point that why we talk about why we want to have conversations as a council with our different boards and commissions. This is a big one. This would have been a really great conversation for us to have, is to sit down with Shoreline Board and talk about how they got here. So I guess what I have are just questions of clarification. If the Shoreline Board and Staff Board are feeling really comfortable with this, I have a lot of confidence. I'm just want some clarifications. I don't know if this was a question that came up from Ms. Agard or this piece in the handout. Who was the source of this? The language from Shoreline Update.
The table?
Yes.
That's from the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Okay, so I have
in response to the CPUB determination.
Okay, so question. There was an observation on pages 43 and 46 about potential tree height. Did we talk about tree height and specificity on tree heights?
We actually, I think it was as a Shorelines Board recommendation, we invited Fish and Wildlife to come speak before the Shorelines Board to have a good conversation about shoreline site potential tree height, what it meant and didn't mean, and where their recommendations were kind of coming from. And we compared that to what the existing shoreline buffers are at the moment to see, is there some gap between site potential tree height buffers and what the buffers that are currently in the code. And I think this is digging back a little ways in my brain, but we concluded that it didn't make sense to switch to kind of a whole new system for assigning buffers based on site potential tree height, which has different numbers for different areas depending on this map, when our proposed or existing buffers, are already 100 or 150 feet, which was very much in line with what the site potential tree height map viewer would have recommended. So we kind of ended up there, but we don't try and inject the terminology of site potential tree height and that sort of new process or new method of determining the buffer into the code. We felt like we're there.
Okay, so tree height still had merit and validity. We were just approaching it from a different.
I think so. It's simpler for staff and I think for applicants to have the numbers that are the 100 feet and the 150 in different environments, and I think for a different part of North Creek, rather than having this kind of it's hit or miss in the city. If you click in an area on the map that pops up a site potential tree height, it's like 105, and in one area it might be 95, and then immediately adjacent, and it just feels a little like it could be challenging to implement that. And 100 feet and 150 feet is certainly simpler and makes
just
for greater consistency. Yeah, easier to implement.
I could see, now I'm just speculating based on the information that you're saying here, I can see it becoming real messy in the sense that tree height is really important depending on where they are in placement on the curves of the stream and the time of day
orientation of the parcel.
And when the sun is hitting the hardest, are those trees there for that, or are they where it's less consequential? So I appreciate just a blanket 100, 150 foot tree. And the maps, I would guess that you're in agreement that the maps seem to be showing that there's pretty much everything's developed that's can be developed.
There's very few new development parcels that are currently undeveloped that are in shoreline jurisdiction that would have had opportunities to use the buffer reduction provision. One of them, I think that Ms. Agard mentioned, and I think there might have been one other, but most of the ones that had oh, look, here's a parcel that has some new development potential. Oh, but there's a levee, there's wetlands, there were many other constraints that were stronger than just the buffer itself.
Okay. Well, okay, thank you. I'm gonna ask a couple really other quick questions, and they're just clarifications for my understanding. I mean, you went through a lot of work to create this document and to have it, and I did my best to digest this. On page 113 of our agenda packet, it was talking about, point number 24A of when appropriate, the shoreline administrator may also require critical area report to include an evaluation by the Department of Ecology or an independent qualified expert. What might trigger that was my question. What might trigger wanting the Department of Ecology to weigh in, hypothetically?
I'll just say that our development review planners often consult our Department of Ecology planner when issues related to this shoreline come up. So It's not, and it's not always dictated by what's in the code. It's what's before them in terms of the proposal and if they think ecology guidance would be useful.
So I'm going to read between the lines here. So there's a lot of conferencing with Department of Ecology, and Department of Ecology may flag something that needs to go deeper. Do I understand that correct? Okay. And then on page 118, I have no idea what my question is till I turn there, of our agenda packet. On point, I don't know, would that I would not write through writing here. Just right below the chart, and it's non-standard modified buffer widths. There is the new added language, city may approve a modification of the required buffered width where there is a proposed development or use is isolated from the critical area and its contiguous buffer by an existing legally established non-conforming. Was this the roadway that you were, or this doesn't refer to the filling in of critical areas. This is something separate. So how, because I did see a lot of language about rehabilitation of critical areas. How would this, because it's separated and it's not contiguous, why would it, what was the reasoning? I'm not asking you to justify it. I just want to know what the reasoning was, why it was not required to be rehabilitated when it was not connected.
This section, I believe, this same kind of language was in the existing SMP, and we reworked it to be consistent with what is included in the critical areas regulations as they apply outside of shoreline jurisdiction.
Okay.
And so it was more, and we spent some time, I think, working with staff and figuring out like how it actually worked in practice, that particular buffer provision, which stops the buffer at a certain improved area. So it was just kind of a reconfiguration improvement and making sure it was clear for staff and for applicants under what circumstances a buffer.
Okay, which wouldn't necessarily be a part of shoreline.
Not necessarily. No, this was about, I think, wetland buffers is where this particular provision is.
Thank you. And then page 120, and hopefully, wetland scientist was crossed out at the top of page 120, and it was qualified professional. What would be a qualified professional?
There's a definition. We updated the definition of qualified professional in the definition section.
And I just didn't see it when I was thumbing through.
Yeah,
So I'll go back and look.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. And then House Bill 1110 said that the critical areas and buffer, we don't have to require them to comply with what's in one.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
The provision, the state law does allow us to exclude up to 25% of our land area for critical areas.
Okay. And then the single-family home, I notice in the shoreline policy is given a lot of priority. Are we going to go, at what point do we go back and, since we're doing comp plan work, are we going to go back and talk about the language for single-family homes being given priority within the shoreline area? I think that's in our shoreline policy.
In the shoreline element, the comp plan section, the decision was made to defer those changes, given that they came up after the shoreline board terms expired and there weren't new applicants for those seats. So when we reconvene the shoreline board for the next update, which will follow shortly on the comp plan update, is when we'll make those changes.
Okay, and can I do a little pitch? Can we have some of our former shoreline board members re-up and see your applications come through? I just want to put that on the side note, so thank you. Thank you for this presentation, and thank you for your patience.
Councilmember Aldrichs.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have one question, and I appreciate the clarification regarding HB 1110. But you specifically addressed middle housing as like, yes, it can be done, and there was also the point about substantial redevelopment. And so saying that substantial redevelopment is allowed under the recommendations. My question, just to connect those two, is middle housing considered substantial redevelopment?
It would depend, but I think in most cases it would, a conversion. I mean, you could do a conversion of an existing large house and divide it into separate dwellings without adding any area at all, but I think in most cases it probably would be.
Yeah, and I think I recall during our May 9th meeting that we sort of talked about what some of those, like what ADUs might look like on some of those properties very close to the water, and how that might relate to the recommendations. But what I'm saying is that, or what I'm hearing you say is that it is possible to do that under these guidelines carefully.
Yeah, it would be very site-specific, I think, based on where the existing development's located, what's the buffer, how much space is available. And some sites it probably won't be possible, and that's because they have very small lots, and we still have a buffer that has to be protected. But there's going to be opportunities for many other properties to do a variety of configurations that include ADUs, detached or attached, and other kinds of middle housing. But very site-specific, and but they can take advantage of the flexibility that's already in the SMP in those residential areas.
I appreciate that answer. Thank you.
All right, I'll go. Over here. So the one thing in this that I have some questions about is the elimination of the buffer exceptions for new construction. I mean, there's a part of me that just says, okay, now that we've developed literally all but one, maybe two lots, like now it would be super harmful for you to develop your last lot, and that doesn't sit great with me. But in order to apply for those buffer reductions, they have to enhance the buffer, correct?
Yes.
And that involves, I'm paraphrasing from what I read earlier, but essentially improving the aquatic function of the river?
The ecological function of the buffer, which some of it is purely buffer kind of improvement, but all of that has some kind of relationship, direct or indirect, to the water function.
So if somebody wants to apply for a buffer reduction, they essentially have to improve the buffer and the aquatic habitat there and leave it better than it was before they built something there, right?
Yep, they have to demonstrate that through the report, and it has to be degraded to begin with. You wouldn't be able to take a forested buffer and then somehow argue your way down to a 60-foot reduced buffer. You wouldn't be able to demonstrate that it's degraded.
Okay, so there's lots of provisions in there to make sure that we're actually getting an improvement on the function.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So I guess if somebody developed a piece of property that had not been developed and they improved the buffer function and the function of the river, what would be the ecological harm?
I think that what the Shorelines Board was considering is more the lost opportunity of potentially having a property that had a fully functioning full width buffer. And that was their kind of decision point, is with the existing developed properties, the opportunity had kind of already, the ship had sailed a little bit, but they felt like it was more important where it was feasible to protect that space if it could be protected.
But if it were redeveloped and the ecological function was improved, what would we be protecting it from?
Right. That might be a good question for Shoreline's Board. I think it was just, that was their decision point.
Okay. I guess I don't understand why we would give up the opportunity, even if it's just on a lot or two, to improve ecological function of the river, because that seems to me to be a good goal, to improve that function.
I guess what you give up is the full buffer. You're allowing development within that buffer area.
Okay.
with that trade-off.
Okay.
And one argument is that the restored buffers don't always function as well as they are intended to.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. All right, I think I already closed the public hearing, and there's no action on this tonight. Do you have everything that you need from us?
I guess just a word on whether you're ready to take action next week or if you'd like to postpone that. Probably one more week, but.
Yeah, I'd like to figure out what we're doing with this buffer on just 1 or 2 lots. To me, that doesn't seem like it's going to have a large effect one way or the other. And I don't love the way that it's been written right now, and the way that it came from the Shorelines Board. I appreciate the work the Shorelines Board did. We've got a great Shorelines Board, and they've done lots of good work for the city over the years. I guess I just don't understand. I guess I don't understand why we're passing up the opportunity for improved ecological function in just a lot or 2, and how that's going to move the needle for the city. Yeah. Oh, hi, Councilmember Dodd.
I think it would help us, being perhaps not a group of shorelines experts or critical areas experts. Sorry to speak for everyone, but I'm pretty confident in saying that for most of us. If you could help us with understanding, like maybe with examples when you have the full buffer on one of those newly developed lots versus an improved ecological function on that reduced buffer, just to really understand that in a little more detail. I also want to add, separate to the mayor's point, I would love to hear more from the most recent iteration of the Shorelines Board on the request to talk about middle housing. My understanding from HB 1110 is that critical areas regulations both still apply and would supersede anything we do, obviously for good reason, but also that we can't over-regulate middle housing as compared to single-family housing. So I'm wondering what the use case would be of that discussion with all of that in place. So just getting some more information about that request would be helpful for me. Thank you.
And Mayor, I think with the combination of questions and some of the comments here, what we'll do is we'll huddle as staff and find a date to bring it back. And if there are any other questions that any council members want to make sure that we specifically address, I'm all ears, but I don't want to leave it hanging of you having to determine as a council right on the spot of, does this make sense to bring back next week or not? We'll determine, and I believe we'll pick a date and that we can do a little more work on, get it published and come back.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you. Yes. Oh, yeah, Councilmember McNeil.
Yeah, so just kind of tagging on to Councilmember Dodd's point, do we have an opportunity to meet with the Shorelines Board prior to that decision? So I would be in favor of having that meeting. It's part of our priority, so I'd be in favor of meeting with them, hearing more from them.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else before I move on? All right. It is 7:02. Next up is Agenda Bill 23129, approval of interlocal agreement to provide a school resource officer for Bothell High School. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. And we do have 2 items under contracts and agreements tonight. Both of them are, they're both interlocal agreements. And so as we wait for our presenters to come forward, I just wanted to note a couple of things about interlocal agreements. One is that by law, no matter the content, no matter what it is, anytime 2 government agencies are coming up with an agreement together that is an interlocal agreement, one of the requirements is that the governing bodies for both agencies take action. So that's why both of these items are before you tonight, in case there's any questions of where, in this case, actually in both cases, I think we're the second body to answer the question. So both of these have been approved by our potential partner agencies. So just want to put that before you. The other thing is just the other thing about interlocal agreements I think that sometimes gets called out too is that for transparency purposes, because these are government agreements to government agreements, we are required also to publish a list or an index of all of the interlocal agreements that we have on our website. So that happens too, and our clerk's office does a great job. Actually, I fact checked. It was a little performance audit today. No, I made sure, and we have them. They're up to date, and there was one passed in July. It's on there. somebody named Robin across the room there. I had her name all over that. So anyway, I just wanted to point both of those things out. Again, they're a little different than some of the other agreements that we go into. With that, our first one that we are looking at, as you mentioned, is with the North Shore School District, and this is related to a request for service to provide a school resource officer at Bothell High School. I am recommending that we do enter into this agreement, and what we're seeking is the authority for me to sign off on it. With that, I'm going to turn things over to our presenters, which is our Police Chief, Ken Suberlick, and Captain Mike Johnson.
Thank you, City Manager Stannard. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, City Council members. As stated, Captain Mike Johnson will be doing the presentation tonight, and I'll just sit over here and wait for any questions.
Thank you, Chief. So as stated, we're asking for you to authorize the city manager to enter into this interlocal agreement with the North Shore School District to allow us to continue to provide SRO services at Bothell High School for the 23-24 year. To date myself and the chief, we had an SRO since we started here. So back in 1993, we had an SRO on campus, and it was sort of a handshake agreement. In 1994, we entered into our first interlocal agreement with the school district. It's been most recently renewed in 2013, and it's been continuing in that arrangement ever since. Recently, there's a new RCW passed that requires any agreement like that to be reviewed annually, and we realized that the agreement was a little bit out of date. The school district convened a committee to look at the issue with the Bothell High SRO, and the recommendation came forward, which resulted in the ILA in front of you. And then, again, that's for the request for the 23-24 school year, which starts tomorrow. If you aren't super familiar with the SRO program, here's a little bit of highlights of what we do. Garrett Ware is the officer that's been up there. He's been up there for quite a few years, and he has worked to solidify those relationships with the school district, with the campus, with the community, with the department. He provides visible presence on the campus. He presents in classrooms. He talks a lot about constitutional law. He goes and talks about what kids' rights are. He does a great job, and he really buys into a team approach, and he creates a culture where that team approach is the norm between the officer, the faculty, the staff, and the students, and the community. And one of his primary functions, and one of the things that has been from the chief on down, is to really strive to keep kids out of the criminal justice system. We do know that there's a lot of thought out there about cops on campus just being up there to keep kids going in the criminal justice system, and we have some information about that if you have questions on it, but that's not been the case at Bothell High. We have a lot of anecdotal stories of Officer Ware helping the students up there instead of putting them in the system, and he works to get school sanctions in place of criminal justice entrance. So with that, we would just ask that, again, you approve the city manager to enter into the ILA.
Any questions from council? Councilmember Zorns?
I don't have any questions, and again, I will yield, hope that if there are questions that will come up. I sat down today and I wrote things that I am grateful for, so if you see my eyes go down, I'm looking at my notes. I'm grateful that the district heard the community and the teachers. I've been at Bothell High a number of times substituting, see Officer Ware in his element, and the dynamics that he has with the kids and the staff. It's very phenomenal. We all should be loved and love on our community with the same kind of intensity that he brings to his job. And I've been to a school board meeting and saw students that are neighbors, or I've been in classrooms with me, and I was so encouraged by the level of thoughtfulness coming out of these high school students. It gives me hope for the next generation on how they defended something that was very, very important to them. So I'm grateful for that the school board heard them. I'm also grateful that we're not that we're not staying 2 steps behind the national trend where it's flipped, and now school districts are scrambling to get their SROs back. I will tell you, I was really concerned that we would lose our SRO, and I know Chief said we'll always have a place for him in our force. He's so phenomenal. Worst case scenario was I was picturing some other part of the country snatching him up, because he is a gem and a great role model for other SROs. I'm grateful for our chief guiding this program, and I'm grateful for Officer Ware and what he's brought to the community. I'm grateful for safety for students and staff, and treating these kids and the community as a whole. And I'm grateful that staff isn't being asked to shoulder a burden of safety that they shouldn't have to be shouldering. They shouldn't have to worry about who's going to be the first responder. We got a first responder right there. They can focus in on teaching and other things that the students need. So just to everyone who's been involved in this, my deepest thank you and appreciation. And that's all I wanted to say.
If nobody else has anything to say, I will accept a motion. Councilmember Mankey.
I move to authorize the city manager to execute an interlocal agreement with North Shore School District to provide a school resource officer to Bothell High School.
Second.
All right, I got a motion from Councilmember Mankey and a second from Councilmember McNeil to move the recommended action. Would anybody like to speak to the motion? Seeing none. City Clerk? Nope. Sorry, missed it. Councilmember Mankey.
I just wanted to echo what Councilmember Zorn said. Just thank you to the department for working with the school district. Thank you for making our program an excellent program. I think that's why the community came out in support of it, why the district supported it. It's not like other programs. It's very effective, and Officer Ware does very good work. I know he won't be there forever, but I have confidence that our program will remain high quality, remain effective, and it will benefit both the city and the school. So thank you so much.
All right, City Clerk?
Thank you. Please say yes or no when I call your name. Councilmember Zorns?
Yes.
Mayor Thompson?
Yes.
Councilmember Alders?
Yes.
Councilmember McNeil?
Yes.
Councilmember Mankey?
Yes.
Councilmember Dodd?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Alcabra?
Yes.
Passes 7-0.
Thanks, presenters. All right, next up, we have the other agenda bill and Deputy City Manager Call. I will let you tell us what we got, or this direction first.
Yeah, I'll go ahead just really quick. So again, another interlocal agreement for consideration. In this case, this would not be considered a new interlocal agreement. It is an expansion of service. So as you'll hear about tonight, the city has been in contract with the Northeast King County Regional Public Communications Agency, commonly referred to as NORCOM for obvious reasons, for fire dispatch services for a number of years. And the question before us tonight is whether or not to expand that service to also include police dispatch service. So with that, I am going to turn things over back to the chief to guide through this presentation, to give a brief history of our relationship with NORCOM and what's being considered. Take it away, Chief.
Again, thank you, sir. Again, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, City Council members. I'll see if I can make my screen work here. Maybe not. Perfect. All right. Today, I'm presenting for you your consideration and approval to authorize the city manager to sign an expansion of the city's existing interlocal agreement with Northeast King County's Regional Public Communications Agency, otherwise known as NORCOM, to include dispatch services effective November 1st, 2023. Tonight, I will do my best to provide a historical overview of why Bothell has two 911 communication centers, how 911 communications are currently routed, and what is gained by expanding our ILA with NORCOM, and again, the action for your consideration. NORCOM was created in October of 2007. NORCOM was formed as an interlocal government agency whose members are public agencies, such as police and fire, and it's governed by a board of which all principals are represented. The City of Bothell was a founding principal with NORCOM in 2007 for fire and EMS dispatch services, along with 12 other police, fire, and EMS service providers. The city's interlocal agreement at that time did not include emergency dispatch services for the Bothell Police Department. Rather, police dispatch services continue to operate out of the Bothell Police Department. What that means is that calls for service within the city of Bothell requiring a police and fire response required two different communication centers at a minimum. So how are 911 services currently provided or routed? When 911 is dialed, the call origin, whether a landline or cell phone, determines who or which dispatch center will answer first. At present, landline calls within the city of Bothell account for 18 to 20% of 911 calls. And cell phone calls within the city of Bothell account for between 80 and 82% of 911 calls. If a person phones 911 from a standard landline or corded phone, the call is routed to the Bothell Police Dispatch Center. The communication specialist then asks the caller if they need police, fire, or medical. If the caller needs police services, the comm center notifies police of the call for service. If it is a fire or medical call, the call is transferred to NORCOM, who then takes the call and notifies fire and EMS of the call for service. Bothell communication specialists will remain on the line to ensure that police also don't need to respond. If a person calls 911 from a cell phone within Bothell, the call is routed to NORCOM directly. Like Bothell, NORCOM asks the same questions: police, fire, or medical. If a caller needs fire or medical, NORCOM will dispatch the appropriate fire or EMS units. And they will notify police if they feel that we also need to respond. Examples would be assisting fire on calls like CPR in progress, if they need an AED, or if there's an unsafe medical scene, or a dual response with RACER. If the caller only needs police services, NORCOM will transfer the call to Bothell Dispatch. Before I begin to speak about NORCOM and the consolidation of services, I must express that Bothell Dispatch, the comm center, has provided quality service to our community for a number of years. However, due to several factors, I have recommended that the city get out of the business of providing police dispatch. And some of those factors include challenges with employee turnover and vacancies, challenges with scheduling employees due to limited staffing to the point that we needed to cancel vacation for our dispatchers, better communication between our neighboring public safety partners in both emergency and non-emergency events, both locally and regionally, better technology available to our officers that will improve officer safety as well as improve efficiencies, to include real-time geolocation of our officers on scene and the ability for officers to access data and reports via their cell phones. There will also be better efficiencies in dispatch and communication with the newly formed RACER program. And lastly, for most emergency or non-emergency calls, callers would be directed to one emergency call center. I would like to add that this is not a budgetary decision. The cost remains similar. This recommendation is based on improved efficiencies, which will result in better customer service and improved emergency communication between our neighboring and regional partners. This is about providing the best customer service possible for those who live, work, play, or travel through Bothell. Bothell's telecommunicators have been notified that the city is getting out of the business of providing dispatch. The city is bargaining in good faith with the affected labor group representatives from AFSCME Local 3845 regarding the impacts to terms and conditions of employment. And before I move on to the next slide, there are some key points I'd also like to bring up about NORCOM. In 2022, NORCOM dispatched approximately 300,000 calls for service to 6 police agencies and 13 fire EMS agencies, including Bothell Fire EMS. Police calls classified as an immediate threat or priority 1 calls were dispatched within 71 seconds from them picking up the phone. And NORCOM offers efficiencies in operations that frankly have been challenging for us. And that is that they have 24/7, 365 tech support when tech goes down. And that is a big deal. So lastly, for reasons that I have described tonight, I am asking for your consideration and approval to authorize the city manager to sign an expansion of the city's existing interlocal agreement with Northeast King County Regional Public Communications Agency, otherwise known as NORCOM, to include police dispatch services effective November 1 of 2023.
All right, anybody have any questions? Councilmember Aldrichs.
My biggest question that I had was answered, and which was that 18 to 20% of calls are from landlines. I guess I was a little curious to know how many people are still using landlines in Bothell.
I don't have a hard number.
Right.
I mean, I can tell you my parents still have one. So it's probably my demographic and above.
I'll say the percentage is slightly higher than I might have guessed if you had asked me to. But I also see that those 18 to 20% of callers are going to continue to receive excellent coverage and support, whether they're calling from a landline or not. For me, the biggest deciding factor is that there's no transfers. That is, I think, a hugely important improvement that we can make for our community without having to move between agencies and have some of the confusion that can exist when that is needed. And then the also secondary reason for me is that there's a better partnership with Racer. One of the things that I found most, I would say, alarming at the principals' assembly was that 2% of Bothell calls were going to Racer, which is a significantly lower percentage than our other partner cities with Racer. And I don't know what was causing that lower percentage, but what I hear you offering us is the ability to get more crisis responders to calls in Bothell, and that is what I believe is really necessary for that partnership to really serve us the way it's supposed to. So I don't know if there's a question there, but if you can at least tell me, like, am I on the right track in my thinking? Is that part of your reasoning? I would appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Today, this afternoon, we actually were meeting with members of NORCOM to discuss, exactly how we are going to integrate our radio communications with Racer. One of the advantages that I see from this is that 3 out of the 5 partnering cities in this will be on NORCOM, and it just makes for ease of operation. For starters, it's pretty much going to be the same SOPs for dispatch for Bothell, Lake Forest Park, and Kirkland now. It just is smoother.
Councilmember Dodd.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I had a different question. I entertained our city manager once a story about calling 911 from the city limits and Snohomish County, unincorporated, versus City of Bothell, and getting transferred a couple of times many years ago. So my question is, does NORCOM support any other cities that have that distinction where they are going to have to transfer, because it's a different agency for unincorporated Snohomish County is my understanding. So do they already have that in play for some other cities, or what are the discussions around that?
That actually is pretty common because we could have something, let's say that somebody calls 911 and it's occurring on 405, that would be a transfer to Washington State Patrol. So that is just part of how the system works. They'll operate within the city, any calls that happen within the city, and they try to geolocate them as best they can. As technology gets better, geolocation gets better. So it doesn't mean all of them will happen. They may end up, you may get a hold of Snow 911 if you are just outside the city up north, but they'll make the appropriate transfers. They'll try to figure out where you're at. It doesn't mean that all transfers are going to go away, but it does reduce it.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to touch on that. Thanks.
Councilmember Mankey.
Thank you, Mayor. Try calling 911 from Lake Washington sometime. It's quite the experience of getting transferred until they figure out where they should really have you. Couple questions from me. Does NORCOM support 911 texting?
Yes.
Okay. A question that I always ask anytime in my day job when I'm making a decision, what happens if it doesn't work out? Is this a one-way door that we walk through and we can never walk back through the other side? Or if it doesn't work out, doesn't hold up to expectations, something we don't like about it, can we walk back through and create our own 911 dispatch center again in the future if we needed to, or if we wanted to?
Well, I'll start with, we've done a fair amount of homework on this. We've done our due diligence. I have spoken to the chiefs that are part of NORCOM, both police and fire. We currently contract with NORCOM for fire services, and we have exceptional service with dispatch. They know our city. They know where businesses are here locally because they dispatch our fire units, and they've been doing that since 2007. I have no concerns about the quality of service that we will get from NORCOM, and that is based on my experience of doing this for 33 years. And I will say, any agency that I've worked for has always had their own comm center. So for me, it was uncomfortable to be thinking about this, but it is for sure the right decision. As far as creating our own comm center after that, no. It would not be easy to do that. Our other option is you have Snow 911 up north. But that puts us back to where we are right now, where we have 2 comm centers for the city of Bothell, where really the goal is to try to have one. So when we have that major emergency and we need to be communicating, and it actually came to fruition when we had our incident up at West Hill, where police and fire are on the scene and we're not able to communicate effectively. I don't want that to happen in a real scenario. It's always better in something that isn't happening, and you kind of figure that out. That was something that really drove the point home for me, that we needed to make some improvements.
Okay, thanks for confirming the permanence of the decision. Just one last question. In terms of the monitoring that we currently have on our civic campus here across the street, the lobby of the police station, and then folks that are in custody, who will be taking on that responsibility and how will that work?
Well, it's a combination. So currently what we're having to do, because those things are monitored in dispatch right now, and so what we've had to do is we've had to put monitors in different locations where the officers are actually writing their reports, or we have our supervisors located. There will be other tech challenges, we'll call it, where dispatch would monitor our cameras in the back lot. Well, that's not an option anymore, but there is technology out there that we can use and create geofences, so if somebody crosses that line, it'll send a notification to us or to NORCOM. It's a challenge, trust me. We're having 2 or 3 meetings a week on just trying to address these as we go, but none of this is insurmountable.
Okay, great, thank you.
Councilmember Zorns?
I'm going to think of questions later on, but I want to make sure I understand you. Right now, about 20% of our calls are being handled through our center because they're land. If it's cell calls, it automatically goes to NORCOM right now as it stands?
So those are the percentage of where those calls go initially.
Okay.
Depending on the type of call, if it's police, fire, or medical, the call center will then transfer it accordingly. So if it's a NORCOM cell phone and they need police, they will transfer them to our Bothell Police Dispatch Center. If it is a landline and they're calling in the landline calls, recorded lines, go to Bothell Police first. And again, police, fire, medical. If they need fire, medical, we transfer those to NORCOM.
Okay. And you were making, thank you. And that's probably where the level of service and response time breaks down the most, is in that transfer of calls. You both are pondering and looking.
I think the bigger challenge for me from a emergency management and risk management viewpoint, it's being able to communicate with other first responders who are on the scene. And for me, this goes back to the 9/11 Commission when we identified that we should be speaking in plain language, not using 10 codes anymore. Communication that is effective, not everybody having their own comms center. We're going to have Kirkland, Lake Forest Park, Bellevue, ourselves, Medina, Clyde Hill, they're all with NORCOM. And one of the things that is also super helpful is we'll have access to their data. When we have crimes occurring, they travel and they go to places like Kirkland and Bellevue and Lake Forest Park. It's better situational awareness for sure. And I'm frankly excited about that.
Okay. And all our racer cities are part of NORCOM right now, except
3
for
out of the
us.
5.
3 out.
So Kenmore and Shoreline are with King County.
Okay. All right. Well, we've received a couple emails, council did, and I really heard how much of that is a community sisterhood, brotherhood within the call center. It breaks my heart that they have to give up vacations. I'm guessing they would rather give up vacations than to lose that community. But staffing, you have enough problems trying to staff. And staffing is a big problem everywhere. How long can people burn the midnight oil and fill in the gaps? Someone made the point that they understand the community. They understand the lay of the land in Bothell. That kind of experience is really important. We lose something when we go into this.
Can I address that?
Yeah, please.
So again, I think it's real easy for us to look at it. Look, it's hard. There's people on the other end of this. Leadership in situations and decision-making like this is not easy. If this is a decision of the heart, you keep the comm center. Because I like these people. I've worked with them for a long time. But my job is to make decisions that are best for the community that we serve, to try to provide the best experience for our customers that call 911 and provide the best officer safety that I can to the first responders that are responding out there at the scene. Again, decision of the heart, keep the comm center. But doing what is best for the community, it is clear. And that makes it really challenging. NORCOM's been dispatching fire and EMS since 2007. They know this community. Our fire and EMS are not getting lost traveling to calls for service. So I just want to, sometimes that gets lost. We do have the comm center right across the street. And it's going to be challenging to lose them.
It's a pretty cool center.
Yeah.
I remember, walking the police station when it was having its grand opening, and it's a great center. However, when people's lives are on the line, how do you put a price on that? So there's efficiencies that there's a lot of efficiencies that you've talked about that are important. And like you said, when you're talking about the safety of the community and the level of service, which sounds, customer service, when somebody's in a crisis, whatever that crisis is, that response time is critical. Seconds feel like hours. So that is a bigger pressing point for me than it pretty much trumps everything that we've been talking about. And I do appreciate there was something else that you had mentioned, and I made notes. And where would I find it? I don't. If you were saying that if tech goes down, they have 24/7, and in a crisis situation, if we had a earthquake and things were getting a little juggled and disrupted, it sounds like they would be able to patch things together faster than we might be able to.
They do. They have a very good staffing model to take care of challenges as they pop up, 24/7, 365.
That's very, very important. And thank you for being candid about the budget. It's the same. We're not doing this because it saves us money. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. I understand it's not easy, and I appreciate the questions from Councilmember Zorns, because our hearts are, with our thoughts, it's not an easy decision, but then again, it's an operational decision. It's not a policy decision. So I appreciate, the thoughtfulness through which you went through making this decision. Question about technology, since I'm a tech guy. We have another brother right here. So is it a matter of taking a cable and plugging it in here, or is it how long is the transfer process from our community to our center to NORCOM?
It's a lift. We started meetings in June, middle of June, and we called them transitionary meetings to try to identify the things that fall between the cracks as you're trying to do something this huge. We're making great headway on challenges as they pop up, dealing with things like cameras and monitors and simple things like call signs. What do we use as call signs? And it sounds simple, but there's a lot of work involved. What started out as a meeting a week has turned into 3 or more meetings a week. But I will say I've been nothing but impressed with the customer service from NORCOM and working with us and trying to resolve issues, trying to meet us halfway. They started doing data transfer weeks ago in preparation for this versus just waiting. So that says a lot to me as an organization. I'm not gonna lie, it's a lift. We're staying busy. My deputy chief, I'd be willing to bet she spends 10 hours a week on this.
And Deputy Mayor, I would just chime in too, just as a reminder of that, because we are still a customer, or we're still working with NORCOM, I think they've also historically at times provided some fallback service for us on both police and fire. So just in case anybody's hearing that, what the chief said is 100% true. It's complex, and that's because of the moving of permanence, of transferring the system overall. But at the same time, at any given moment, if something happens to our system, and this has been that way for years, and it'll continue to be between now and November 1st, if something goes down with Bothell's dispatch system, we can also fail over to NORCOM in an instant. So there's not a risk here of not being able to receive calls, or that we're going to have no dispatch. That's not a scenario here. But I think that the transfer of making sure that then all of the systems come together and everything gets married up, that is where the complexity and the planning, and again, I really appreciate the view of what's going to fall through the cracks, let's find it now. That's where all that comes in. But at the end of the day, of the critical need of being able to answer a call for 911, we have that today, and we'll have that on November 1st as well.
Thank you.
Councilmember Dodd.
Thank you. I did think of one more question, piggybacking off of Councilmember Menke's point. So I appreciate looking at technology to fill the gaps of having sort of eyes on site 24/7 at headquarters. If technology ends up, it can't fill those gaps appropriately, do you have budget to have someone do that? Like, what if you need a human looking at the cameras? It's just not there yet. Because some of that technology is not great yet. You know, it's still emerging. So I'm just wondering, is there what are the different options you're looking at if that doesn't quite work out?
Well, we have a number of options. The easiest option, and we actually built it into the facility way back in 2000, is that officers can write their reports down in holding, down in the room where the suspects are being held, if that is a concern that we have. As far as monitoring the areas like back lots, maybe the vestibule out front, those can be, we can have cameras installed that have geofencing in that. That is super easy. A number of agencies currently use that. But I think the biggest challenge for me that I view as risk is when you have somebody in holding and you need to make sure that they're being monitored, because it's a risky place to put somebody who can be depressed, and you want to make sure that they don't hurt themselves while they're in custody. So we can easily have officers write reports in that area, but a good fix for that is having the monitors and the cameras installed in the other areas of the department where other people are also writing, because you can be distracted. If you're the officer who makes an arrest, you can be distracted on a phone call. And if other people are in the building and they're watching that screen, that's just extra set of eyes and ears.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Last call. This is one of those decisions that I wish that somebody else would make, but it falls on us. I go back to some really good advice that I got my first month on city council, and it was, whatever you do, the community needs to be your North Star. The only people you owe anybody to are the residents of Bothell. And Chief, you put it well, there's people on the other end of it. And it's not a fun decision, but I don't see a way to have multiple dispatch centers that does not involve needless time lost transferring between the two of them. Like, that's just going to be a feature, it seems like. And I trust the work that you've put into it, and I'll be supporting this with a heavy heart.
Thank you, sir.
All right, I'll accept a motion. Councilmember Dodd?
I move the recommended action.
Second.
All right, I've got a motion from Councilmember Dodd and a second from Councilmember Aldrich to authorize the city manager to sign an expansion of the city's existing interlocal with the Northeast King County Regional Public Communications Agency, NORCOM, to include police dispatch services effective November 1st, 2023. Would anybody like to speak to the motion? Councilmember Mankey?
Thank you, Mayor. I, like my fellow council members, feel heavy about reduction in forces of staff. It's never fun to do that, and it affects real people in the community, people who live here and also work here. But I think the benefits laid out before us are ones that we can't ignore. Being able to better communicate with and between agencies, even our own agencies here, in moments of crisis and critical incidents, I think is incredibly important. I know there's a technology for that. We could patch calls through or patch radio frequencies through, but not having to do that saves a lot of time and creates a lot better experience for those in the midst of all of that while they're trying to deal with those incidents. I think also the reduction in transfers and faster dispatching is incredibly helpful as well. So for those two reasons, I think there's a benefit here, and I will be supporting the motion.
All right, City Clerk?
Please say yes or no when I call your name. Councilmember Zorns?
Yes.
Mayor Thompson?
Yes.
Councilmember Aldrich?
Yes.
Councilmember McNeil?
Yes.
Councilmember Mankey?
Yes.
Councilmember Dodd?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Alcabra?
Yes.
Passes 7-0.
Thank you, City Clerk. All right, the next thing on our agenda is a study session. Before we do that, it is 7:43. We are going to take a 17-minute break, and I will see you back here at 8 p.m.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
All right. Next up, we have a study session. Welcome back, everybody, for council meeting and agenda improvements. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. So we do have one study session tonight, and it is, oftentimes we're looking at things that are out in departments or different things that are happening. And this is a topic that's pretty much contained right here at this table, so that makes it pretty nice. We are following up on some requests that were made as part of the council retreat, which was back in January. So I want to clarify, too, that many of the changes, including how we're sitting tonight, have already been made. But we wanted to come back and, before we start making changes in the protocol manual and that sort of thing, I want to confirm, how are things working? What do we need to know? Laura has a series of items that have been teed up in the agenda bill and to be able to discuss and get feedback on. Also, of course, we're both here to take notes, and if there's anything else that council has feedback on, we can contemplate that and bring that forward to an upcoming protocol manual update. The other thing I just wanted to note too is that there's some other work that does involve council meetings that was identified in some prior discussion at the retreat, but then also made it into a council priority. So just as a reminder, within the community of trust and respect area of the council priorities, there is a request to develop a communication plan with tools that maximize communication and engagement with the community. It includes things like City Hall to the People plan, public forums, strategies to educate public on issues, PR strategies, neighborhood signage. So a number of things that I know are really of interest of the council. We're going to be bringing a council priorities update forward in October. So wanted to just say that too. That's not to say like anything other than, just for context, that's a whole separate body of work. Our assistant city manager, Becky Range, is overseeing and working with the comms team and her team. And we're really grateful for that too. So kind of odd to say what isn't involved as you're introducing a topic, but I thought that was one that there's just enough of a nexus I wanted to clarify. All that being said, Laura will now make everything else make a lot more sense. I'm going to turn it over to her to lead through the presentation.
Thank you. Hello. Yeah, tonight we're just seeking feedback on proposed recommendations and improvements to council meeting agendas and the agenda bill itself. So with that, we're going to move over. The overview is, of course, we had the January retreat, and we've implemented some things, like as Kyle said, sitting down at the floor here at study sessions, holding open houses and public forums out in the community. Examples of that are middle housing walking tours, the comprehensive plan open house, and holding public hearings to receive public input in meetings prior to bringing the related subject back for action, and things like that. And so tonight we're seeking feedback, and we will formalize any of these, anything that council agrees on, we'll formalize that as part of the protocol manual that we'll be bringing back in October. So I will just state that your priority 3 is to implement improvements to the council meetings and the meeting agenda that result in enhanced communication and greater public engagement. And again, I already said this, but public hearings to receive public input only, no action. This is what we've already implemented, no action that evening, which like tonight we had one. So we're also, public hearings, ordinances, resolutions, and certain contracts will have 2 to 3 touches so that we're not asking council to adopt something that they're just hearing that first time that evening. Using the term resident throughout our agenda bills, and conducting the public forums and public open houses to gain public feedback. So some of the recommendations we're thinking about is revising the order of the agenda for better flow, changing visitor comment to public comment, adding a report section so that it'll say reports, and under that you'll have city manager, subsection of that will be outside presentations, staff briefings, board and commission reports, because our hope is that, you know, as we move forward, we'll have more regular updates from our board and commissions, and then council committee reports. And then adding in a section for appointments for board and commissions, pro and con committees, council committee appointments, things like that. PowerPoints, we're suggesting that PowerPoints will be posted to the city council meeting page by Tuesday afternoon, so that the public and the council can review those before you get to your meeting. We're going to capture questions from study sessions and longer presentations to include them as a memo for a subsequent meeting, and having annual OPMA training for the council, just as a refresher, you know, each year. I think it's good for all of us, just to keep us on track. So, some of the things I'd like some additional feedback from the council is on the projected agenda items. Right now, council, you know, we're using a form, and council gets an item on the agenda. We're hoping to kind of talk that through and see how we can better do that that will work for council and the staff. So I'm looking for a little bit of suggestion on that. Kyle, did you want to touch on that a little bit?
Sure. I think one of the things that that I was speaking to Laura about, and I've spoken with a number of the council members too, is right now the protocol manual talks about how something has to be brought up and then voted on within that section, or there was a form that was implemented, I believe, during the pandemic and with virtual meetings. And again, I think the intent of that form was to add some clarity around what is being requested, so it could be something that could be sent to council to look at ahead of time. There's a few things with the form that then I would suggest if we want to keep with something like that we'd change. I think that having support up front of 3 council members puts us perilously close to having 4 council members talking about something outside of a meeting, which we're committed to not doing, but it's almost like it tees you up to have to walk that line. And one of the things that I think as a principle, and we can work out some methods and make maybe some suggestions if council's interested in a protocol update, is thinking about how topics are introduced. And that can be, you know, even in check-ins with the city manager, or even if it is brought forward at a meeting. But the idea of then before that it would be committed to saying, does everybody want to take action on something, or phrasing things in terms of a deliverable, so to speak, that the first step would be directing staff to go do some pre-work on it, of scoping it out, looking at what would be, you know, what's some analysis of what it looks like, answering some questions if council is curious about it but not willing or not necessarily interested in committing quite yet. What are we researching for you, and then agreeing upon a time to bring it back. So that could be something that would be done as a scoping, as a request by an individual council member. I think we'd want to have some checks and balances of making sure that we wouldn't want to have a scenario where a council member was requesting something behind the scenes every week of, hey, go research this, hey, go research this, hey, go research this. But we could come up with a manner of having that too. I don't want to let the worst case scenario dictate. And then, yeah, having a commitment that in that section of the meeting, there's a conversation around then of what's behind it, and have some staff input to help frame for the full council to decide, is this something we want to take on? So that's just some conceptual things to talk about, but would love to hear too as we progress through this of what are some of the principles that council would want to see. I can imagine that the way it is now, you're kind of like waiting on bated breath of, is somebody going to bring something up, and what do I know about it, and what am I going to say? So I think at the end of the day, maybe even just a principle of having a written request, again, not necessarily a form, but something that can be published in the packet ahead of time, and maybe some criteria that will address, like, what's the scope, what's the schedule, what's the ask, what's the anticipated level of effort, and that can be validated by staff too. So those are some of the thoughts that we've been discussing.
Thank you. And some of the other things are how's study session, how's this format working for you all now, and if you have any additional feedback on that. We were in 107, 108, as you know, we came back here. And so we just want to see, I'd like a little feedback from council. Do you see any improvements to this? You know, how we could set it up a little bit better? Is this working for you? That kind of thing. And then council conversations, again, is that working? Do you like the way it's set now? One of the suggestions I have on the agenda itself is to maybe move it up prior to study sessions so that, you know, you have your talk and then, you know, it's not so late in the evening but also to try and keep the meetings on track. Because one of the things we've heard a lot is that the meetings can go too long. And so some thinking about ways we can keep it on track. One of those things, maybe we use a timer so that we're, you know, we have 45 minutes for this study session. Maybe we set a timer for 45 minutes and then, you know, we check in if it's going over. How much longer do you want to discuss this? Or if we have items afterwards that are, you know, we haven't gotten to and it's getting really late, do we have a end session? Like we just end at a certain time and anything else gets rolled to a subsequent meeting. So that's kind of some of the stuff we want some feedback on. And I don't know if we want to talk about that first. If you guys want to have any suggestions or feedback, or should I just go through some of the agenda bill recommendations? Yeah. Yeah. So.
Well, then I'm just going to jump in. So I think for council conversations, I think being the newest person here, it's a little murky to me what I should be bringing up during council conversations. Is it, I mean, it's been used for community events, for celebrating, you know, different residents or different things that are happening, reminders of events, for grievances, for all kinds of stuff. So I think just a clear understanding of what that's for. And also maybe instead of 10 minutes, like you said, at the end of maybe an already long meeting, maybe we set time for it the first meeting of the month and we don't do it every time. Something like a different option like that. And it's earlier in the meeting because I do wonder how many people stay till the end of a meeting for council conversations. I know it's thrilling, but perhaps not as thrilling as we might think. So that's my thought.
You don't have to ask me. You can just talk. Oh, that's true. It is. I'm going to actually back up and start earlier and say absolutely yes to a new format of bringing agenda bills up to council. And for history, kind of why we have what we have now is because there used to be really no way for council members to do that. And with no formalized way for council members to bring things up, it got very frustrating when you were a council member that wanted to bring something up and there was no path whatsoever. And, you know, back in the day, it was basically like if the mayor wants to do it, do it. And if the mayor doesn't, then you're out of luck. And I want to do better than that. So this is kind of what we landed on. But I have absolutely no doubt that there can be something better. And if y'all come up with something better, please do. I'm not married to this process at all. I just want to make sure that every council member feels that their voice is heard and they can have the conversation about bringing something up, regardless of how many people agree with them. And obviously some, you know, backstops around that. Like, you know, Kyle, you mentioned, like, you know, asking for a dozen hours of staff work every week is not going to work, but just something so we all feel heard. I feel like reducing surprises in meetings is a good general goal. Like when we know what we're going to talk about, when we know that we're doing the city's business, you know, when people aren't saying, hey, what do you think about this? Do you want to do something about this? And you have never heard anything about it before and you have no idea what's going on. Like something where when we do tee something up for the agenda discussion or future agenda discussion, that we all know what we're talking about. Like there's been a little bit of work done so we understand like what we're going to be discussing when we come into the meeting. It could be part of that process too.
So the onus will be on us to think ahead.
Yep. Yep, and there'll need to be a deadline for that. You know, we can't come to you 10 minutes before the meeting and say, I want to talk about this. Like, I mean, there needs to be a process, but like, I feel like if we're going to be discussing the city's business and talking about what we think, we should all have the opportunity to at least know that that's going to happen, prepare for it, and represent our constituents well.
Appreciate that. I think something that I'll just clarify too is that even in my statement, there are going to be times too where there is something that's timely and like the deadline. So I think what we'll try and bring to is something that gives the flexibility of acknowledging of like, it's not really about a deadline or that sort of thing, but I think the spirit of no surprises aspect, I think that makes some sense. And how do we communicate if, I think we could have something, for example, that said if the council member submits a request that could be published in the packet, if something emerges that's timely and can't wait for the next meeting, but is after packet publication, that an email will be sent no later than some set apart in time. And then, again, that way that the expectations are upfront. And there will always be an exception, and we can manage through it. But I think trying to capture the spirit of what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, the flexibility to do what's right in any given situation that we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what that's going to look like down the road. And I feel like council conversations is something similar, where we had a gap and council tried to figure out how to fill it and probably didn't do that in the best way. It's not being utilized much because it happens at the end of long meetings and we're all like, please just let us go home. I'm sick of talking to all of you. And, but there are things like Councilmember Zorns does her local heroes. Like if there's a way that in reports we could have just like community reports just have an opportunity to do that. That doesn't add a lot of time to the meeting, and I think that's valuable. I don't think we need to continue to do council conversations if we set everything else up correctly, because a big part of the why we did that is it was the opportunity for council to informally discuss ideas like, do you want to talk about this on a future agenda someday? And if we have the rest of the process set up well, then I just don't think we need that unstructured time.
Can I leap in? Yeah, I like council conversations. It's a chance for us to just kind of breathe and be human and community with each other. So I do like that. I'm not married to where it has to fall on the agenda. I don't know if we've moved past the projected agenda item piece, but we haven't.
No.
Are we coming back to it?
No, go for it.
Keep going back and forth.
Okay.
That's right.
I really, there was a time in Bothell's history where you could go and see when things were going to be discussed. Items were going to be discussed, like a sub-area was being redesigned. So that was laid out. You saw that a few months out, that when a meeting was scheduled to be on. And with the caveat that it could be changed, and the community really liked the predictability. I think we bring down community stress when they know when something's coming up, and definitely have the caveat that this is subject to change, but an idea, so they kind of know how the city's going with it. And then you were talking about agenda items and putting a timer on them. Like
I'm sorry, say that again.
you were talking about on an agenda item, agenda bill that we were talking about, maybe putting a timer on it, and something like that. If we're not going to put things in I like the idea of putting a clock that we're going to be done at 10, and we decide whether or not we're going to go another 20 minutes. If we're not going to put agenda bills in order of their importance of having to be decided on, when something goes past its allotted time and we can afford to say, okay, we're at 45 minutes, do you want to save this for the next council meeting? I don't know how to, time management is not my day job. So, some tool that can say, we've put 45 minutes in on it. Do we continue at the expense of some other agenda bills, or I'm open to whatever ideas that you have there.
So what I hear you saying, and sorry, Laura,
No, go
I
ahead.
can't help myself.
No, that's
I won't
fine.
do it again. What I hear you saying though is you're interested in making sure there's a deliberate decision of, do we want to spend more time on this topic?
At the expense of something else.
Yeah, on the expense of something else, or making the deliberate decision of, we'll continue with this topic and extend the meeting if needed, that sort of a thing.
Right.
Making sure that there's a pause for conversation about that before it's 11:30 at night.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And it just snowballs.
And I imagine that as an educator, that classroom management, you probably actually do have some time
Well, there
management
is a little
skills.
bit of that. There is a little bit of that. That's true, and any parent probably also has that.
Firstborn. I had to say it.
Yes, it is firstborn. And then my only comment about adding new items, and I'm sure you will do this, is having the information, does it fit with our goals that we've set up? And is it going to, not only the staff time and the potential cost of whatever that we're talking about, like, well, that's a $10,000 ticket. Is it going to come at the expense of something else? Are we going to have to trade it out for something else? If we can make that guess that, yes, if we talk about this, it's going to, another agenda bill that we were going to talk about, like playground equipment, we won't be able to talk about. We're going to have to save it for next year. I mean, reality checks are good. So I think that's as far as the only comments I have had on them as far as we've gone here so far.
I'll go. So let's see, the study session format, I kind of had that up at the top. I think the format's great. I think I like the fact that we're down here in a more of a informal setting and able to talk across the table with one another, I think is important. I think a lot of things flush themselves out when we are in this setting versus up there having to look back and forth. So I really do like the format. Bringing items forward, I think is, for me, is something, having been on council for quite a while now, is kind of a balancing act. And I think if we open the door, set a precedence for just allowing whatever to come, it'll change the dynamic of making sure that we're actually doing the city's business. So I want to have that continue to have a conversation. I'm just saying, I want to throw that out that I think there was a check and balance put in place for a reason previously. Not saying we can't change it. I'm just saying, let's just make sure that we talk about how we want to change it. Super excited about the reduce and not have surprises in meetings. I think that is a very important piece of what we need to try to accomplish. The OPMA meeting, I think, is a great touch. I think that's very important for us as council members. Hopefully we can do it in a time of year when new council members are coming in the future, so that they're also participating in those meetings and get that information. Council conversations, whether we do them or don't do them, I think they're important, just to have on the agenda. If we spend 2 minutes on it, we spend 2 minutes on it. If we spend 30 minutes on it, we spend 30 minutes on it. But I think it allows us that if we forgot something or didn't have something at a time of a meeting, we can always bring it up, and, that we can't talk to each other outside, more than 3 of us. And so I think it's important for us to be able to have that time together. Deadlines on agenda items gives me pause. I think it's important for us to not get into a position, and I'm not saying we can't talk about this, but I'm saying it gives me pause because we're doing the city's work, right? We're supposed to be looking at items, and if we take more time on something and we set a timer and then we don't come back to it, or we limit ourselves to it, that gives me a little bit of pause. And I'm not saying we can't work through that and how that looks, but always want to make sure that we take the time that's needed to make good decisions. I think that's something that just comes to my mind. I like the mayor's comment about community reports. Just, whatever, if it's a hero thing or whatever, just things that we want to bring up. I think that's cool how we can implement that as well. Yeah, so that's what I had.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rami. I saw that head nod. Going back to the agenda bill. So the projected agenda discussion, I really appreciate the thoughts that City Manager Stannard shared about that. What you kind of described sounds good, and I'd love to see that as a possibility. And to add to what you described, like, if there could be like an equity section in there. I also saw somewhere else that there is, you know, how does this relate to council vision and priorities? I think those are kind of good, like, as a council member, if you're going to be proposing something, check with yourself and like kind of think through. It helps to kind of be prompted to think through some of the implications. So the current form that we have hasn't really been utilized, I don't think, since you've gotten here.
I think we may
maybe seen it a couple
We've had
times.
2 or 3, but
okay.
yeah, I mean,
it doesn't come up very often.
I do think that our check-ins and having conversations has really helped to be able to figure out how do we want to address things.
Mm-hmm.
But I also know that that won't always be true. There will be times where there's something that needs to be above. And what I will say, what I appreciate about what's working is that it's built on trust, that there's trust in the minute that doesn't happen. So I don't want to, I think part of having trust is to know that you have a system in place for when that doesn't exist. So I don't want to design out of something that has a purpose. Councilmember Neal mentioned some of these things. I think like everything that's in the protocol manual, there's something that happened that made it so that there's one. And so we don't want to lose the good lessons. So, but yes, there's been a couple, but not frequently.
Yeah, and so I think that form kind of developed out of a particular need, and it was just sort of a draft, right? And we can iterate on that. And I like what you've described. So I'd love to see what you described in like fleshed out, and what that looks like. Council conversations, for me, I really like the idea of community reports, because a lot of it does have to do with what's going on within our community, and kind of what is the health and status of what do we know that's going on, and in a way that could be somewhat of a conversation of, sometimes somebody shares, oh, this is coming up, and it's like, oh yeah, this is coming up too. I'd really love to see that, because I know that the community would be more involved in those conversations if that was in the report section.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was going to say. Maybe we could add that as a subheading in the report section. And then, we'll still have probably an other category, because there are things that don't fit within any of the other categories. And that could be things that, council could have a conversation about under that category there. We could talk about it.
I think to Councilmember Dodd's point, that if we had a better definition, a better scope of what council conversations is supposed to be about, we might be able to know what some of those other things that aren't covered elsewhere are.
And I think that's an important distinction in some of the evolution that's taking place of some of the other sections that have come up. So if you look at your protocol manual now, council conversations there is a definition, and it opens up addressing the Open Public Meetings Act, which we've heard here of. Really, it's providing a forum of being able to have a conversation in a sanctioned environment. So there's that, but then it also says that that council may ask questions of staff that require only responses or factual information or statement of existing city policy. Not even really sure how we'd fact check each other on that one. Or may request that non-routine matters of public concern be placed on a future agenda. So that's an example of where something very within the definition that is currently exists actually now is being handled in a different section. So we have 2 opportunities to do that, which may not be a problem, but I do think it's, if you were looking at this and attending your meeting for the first time, you'd wonder, well, which one do I do? And then it actually also says council members may not discuss non-agenda items among themselves. So that's under council conversations too. So I think we need to true it up a little bit.
Yeah.
So all this feedback's really helpful. I think we will come back with some sort of, if the interest is keeping it and it's a matter of where and that kind of thing, I think we can also tighten up hearing some of the feedback here.
Nice. I do have 2 additional thoughts on council conversations as well. I think somewhere, I don't know where, it might have been in the agenda packet, I saw a suggestion that if we do have council conversations, it would only occur if we're finishing, like if it's before 9 o'clock. I don't even know where I'm getting that idea. Maybe that was something you said in our check-in, Kyle. But the idea that if we're trying to keep our meetings shorter, then council conversations could be an additional option because it's a short meeting and that could be a time to connect. So we're not having council conversations at 11:30 at night, but it's 8:45 and that's a great time to, have a more community oriented, how everybody's doing kind of conversation. If that is what the protocol manual will define it to be, I don't even know. So I think I lean towards having a community report section where we can share the content of council conversations earlier in the meeting when people are still present, and not having to stick through an hours-long meeting to get to that part. And then, do you want me to keep going with other suggestions, or? Okay. I love the PowerPoint posted by 4 p.m. suggestion. Absolutely love it. Can't wait to see it. And then
except on Monday, not Tuesday.
On Monday, not Tuesday.
So I can have a chance to read it. I was going to suggest it when my turn came, but...
Go for it. Yeah. Yeah. I am not opposed to Monday at 4 p.m. and not Tuesday at 4 p.m. because there's a chance that I'm not going to be able to check my email and, read updates and everything between 4 and 5 when we have dinner. And that's just because parenting.
Well, no, sorry, you're all looking at me because I just think, we could, obviously, on some of the bigger topics, like say some of the large comp plan stuff, I worry that 4 p.m. on Monday might, there might be changes from what you get to what you see that evening, the next evening at the council meeting. But I think we can strive for that.
Yeah, and we'll figure out then too of if
And
something
then
does have to get updated, how do we communicate that to the community and to the council? I think we can work from
Or
there.
we can do like we do at work, end of day, which is by midnight or following morning, type of. So yeah, end of day. So.
That's for people who work at Amazon. I'm sure Rami has lots of late nights for his job. The last thing that came up for me is study sessions. I very much prefer this format. The only thing that my only qualm about it is that we're stealing staff people's tables to move them from the side. It's a cute little dance that everybody does. But I always feel a little bad about kicking them out of their seat and saying, all right, we're stealing your table now. Everyone's told me don't worry about it.
We're giving them an excuse to leave. It's okay.
And, and then we see them show up in the chairs behind, and that's also fine. We appreciate your faces being here. And yeah, I don't like the idea of limiting, of putting a timer on study sessions. Unless we do all right, so we've spent this amount of time on this topic. Would you like to continue? Let's give it, sort of like how we extend executive sessions. Mm-hmm. If we were to use a similar kind of
a check-in.
Yeah, let's see how much longer, because we do want to make sure that everybody gets heard. And some people are more long-winded than others, and we don't necessarily. Are you looking at me? And and we don't want to shortchange anybody's voices. So I think to do that would be, I prefer the check-in rather than the let's cut conversation off and bring it back later kind of thing. So yeah, I think that's
my feedback. I'm really grateful that you're bringing this to us to have this conversation. And yeah, I'm excited to see what comes out of it.
Thanks, Rami. I ordered mine how the packet was ordered, so I'm just going to start from the top and go down. I do like the addition of the appointment section. I think that would be good. Others have mentioned this before, but the community reports section, one thing that I've seen from watching Linwood's council meeting is that they do a council committee reports and community reports all in one. Each council member gets 2 minutes to speak about whatever they like in those topics, and then when they're done, they move on to the next, and they just kind of go down the line. So I don't know if we want to do that or not, if we have a Bothell way of doing it, but it's one thing I noticed that they do that I liked and thought it was pretty effective, and everybody kind of is lined up ready to go with their things. In terms of the council materials, presentation materials being made available online prior to the council meeting, yes, please. I love it. I also like the idea that Councilmember Zorns raised about the projected agenda being available to the community again as well. I know that we used to have that. I don't know how long it's been since it's been gone, but I always looked at it. I'm one of those weirdos that would look at it. I know there are many other residents that would also look at it just to kind of see what's coming up in the future and when they really need to pay attention and engage on things that really matter to them. In terms of the projected agenda discussion, I do like the idea that the city manager raised around bringing things to him, running through him. He's earned that trust, I feel like, at least in my professional relationship, I feel like I can bring that forward. And I think based on the feedback that everybody gave during the review session, I would hope that they would feel that way as well. He also raised an idea of a maximum number of hours that staff could focus on something that a council member wanted to bring up and discuss, and I think that's a great idea. If we put a limit on that and then it comes forward to us with additional information, facts, then we have a discussion at that point. I think that could be beneficial. Council conversations, I could give or take. A lot of things that we talk about are community events, community related, so that could go into that section. There may be other places where other things could go, but I would like it to be available. Maybe not every week, or maybe we somebody has something they want to raise during that time, we add it to the agenda at the top of the meeting. I think we're allowed to do that because it is not something we're taking action on, it's more discussion. So I think that could be one way to handle it, but I think there should be an opportunity to engage in that if we want to, but it doesn't have to be every meeting. Study sessions, I like this setup a lot. I think if we're stealing staff tables, we could probably order a couple more tables and go that route. But I do like sitting in this room. I prefer this room over that room, both for just being able to see everybody. I think when we have an audience in the room, I think it's easier for them to hear, and then it's easier to see on the screen when we're watching presentations. The length of meetings question is an interesting one. I, like many other council members, am not a fan of limiting conversation for topics. I think there's opportunities for efficiencies, though. There always are. I think we can ask our questions during one-on-ones and reach out to staff prior to the meeting and get a lot of questions answered. There are always questions that come up during presentations, so I think it's appropriate to ask those questions. But I think if we do our work up front and we ask those questions up front, it could cut down on some of that the question and answer time period. I also think it's important for staff to be concise in their presentations, and they've been doing a really good job of that. I think it's more of when we have guest presenters that can sometimes run a little bit long. I think if we review their presentations beforehand and we reiterate at the beginning and when it's coming up and the night of this is slotted for this period of time and we really need to hold to this period of time, I think that helps reinforce to them that they need to be efficient with their use of time as well. So I would be in favor of that. And then as far as the agenda bills go, linking language to council vision and priorities, yes, please. I think that's fantastic. If there could be a community engagement section, input section, that's great too. I would love to see one that talks about a funding source and whether it's in the existing budget or not, planned or unplanned. Just could be like an extra line on there, that would be great. And then providing links in the AB to previous packets, I think is acceptable as well. I know that's harder for the folks that do get paper packets, but if there's a way that we can assist them so that they still get the information they need, but we can kind of cut down on the length of the document that we received, I think that's good as well. They could pull it up, but I know handwritten notes, some people process with handwritten notes much better, so I don't want to take away from anybody.
Thank you.
I wanted to plus one on two things that you said and evolve one. So I really appreciate the thought of instead of, and you didn't say this, but I'm going to evolve it. Instead of council conversations, everybody gets 3 minutes for committee reports, community reports. I saw somebody doing something cool at this place and good job, dude, or whatever it is. So I think that'd be great. And I said 3 minutes because we have a timer for that. So that also cuts people off who want to take a long time. So I would love that. We would lose the conversational aspect. So I think that's an important thought. But I love the idea of instead of saying committee reports, just like council reports or whatever it is. I think that's really cool. And then the funding source item is a really good idea because someone's going to ask. It's probably going to be Ben, but someone will ask. So I think that's really good to have in there.
I also appreciate what Councilmember Mankey said about meetings going long, because it's mostly an us problem, I think. And like if we complain about meetings going long, usually that means that we are talking a lot in meetings. Like it's usually not staff.
I could just go like this.
I just want you to know that I just needed you to hear that, Laura.
Do you want to hear a confession?
Sure.
I'm even embarrassed to put this publicly out there, but when we were doing this all remotely, I would start watching the clock and counting minutes on how much we were all, myself included, taking. And we burned up, you're right, we burned up.
Who was winning?
We burned up a lot of time. I'm not naming names. But yeah, you're right. Go look in the mirror. You know, we need to look in the mirror when we complain about how long we go.
Rami's graciously allowed me to go before him again. So I'm struggling with the time. I love the idea of the time limits, but I'm struggling with the time limits because sometimes we have conversations that need to go a little longer. And so I think we as a council maybe can figure out how we can manage that together, but to cut somebody short at a time limit may not give them the opportunity to really get the information out they need to get out. So I struggle with that a little bit, so hopefully we can continue to have a conversation around that. And I think something that comes to my mind when it comes to our agenda packets these days is they're very long. There's a lot of meat and substance in the packets. And so maybe if we can collectively, you know, whoever's putting the packets together, really figure out and dial in that time frame. Because if you take a look at the history of how long some of the things that we've talked about take, maybe that will help us kind of fine tune. Let's put these 4 or 5 things together and these things together to define it a little bit better. So I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that maybe that can kind of help us really get to the substance. Because what time do we want to start and what time do we want to end every week? Who has the answer to that? And if we have that answer, you know, management-wise, I set agendas every day for my jobs, and I know how much time things are going to take, and I don't put too many things on there that are going to go over those times. So maybe we can do a little bit of that at the same time.
I jumped in, so I cheated a bit, so that's why I allow. So it's cool. I agree. The presentation thing, it would be really cool. That was a request I made, having it ahead of time, because some information is just summarized in a different way than in the agenda, in the packet, so just easier to digest some of that information. I love the standardized presentations, by the way, the new cell, unless an outsider comes in, which messes up the way I'm looking at things. But yeah, no, it's thank you. Projected agenda, that time seems. I like the first item I brought up was in the projected agenda, which everybody was excited about, is still excited about, the allowed EFG one that we are working on right now. I love the study session format. I think we are still having Robert's rules taking over because of the setting we're in. Like when we were outside, we actually had more conversations than we do right now. But it's great. It's a good start to be here and down here. Council conversations. We self-policed on this thing in the past. When we went way over, we said, let's just call it good tonight and just head home. Otherwise, we had a conversation. So if we are ending the meeting earlier, or the business stuff earlier, maybe we do allow ourselves to speak together also. Okay. Time boxing agenda items. I like the check-ins. When we have meetings in our day, in our day jobs, we have our 45-minute meetings, hour meetings, whatever. It's like, well, it's 15 minutes to go. Do we want to end it now, or do you want to schedule a new meeting type thing? But then you also have to be cognizant. You don't want to have things stack up on top of each other. Otherwise, you'll never get anything done. Optional. Yeah, that's it. The length of meetings. I like to time box end the meeting at a decent hour instead of having to end at 11 or 12, which was more often than not. And given comp plan coming up, I feel like we're going to have a lot more conversations. I don't want to have, midnight meetings every month from now until December 2024. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. So James I think it was James, maybe it was Ben. We talked about the agenda build recommendations. So one of the things we're going to do is start linking language with the council goals when that's appropriate, and adding a community engagement / impact section. And then ABs, again, we're going to try and firm those up a little bit so that it's more on what's new versus, whole huge thing about what's happened in the past, but links to the old packets. For those of you who get a hard copy, we can work something out. We'll figure something out for you. And then clearer language for the recommended actions so that it's more, more standardized, so that I think that's where we're going with that, is that with like a public hearing, this is what we're doing tonight, this is what's going to go forth, and it's the same every time, not, we have a public hearing here, and yes, we want you to do this, but, first we're having a public hearing only tonight for received public input. We will bring this back at a subsequent meeting. And so just standardizing the language for recommended action a little bit. And so what we have coming up is protocol manual updates. Our protocol manual says that we will update it every 2 years or as needed. It's needed. We have a lot of housekeeping items that we need to clean up. Also, we want to put some expanded language regarding local ballot measures, like what happened in June 25th, so that it's in there. And the agenda order, anything that we discuss, and once it's decided, we're going to update the protocol manual so that it's, what's been decided by council. So that might be, we've got it October, but it might be November based on this conversation tonight. But I think we can get it in October. We'll bring back an agenda bill kind of summarizing all this for council vote, right?
For the update of the protocol manual, if any one of us has something in there that we want to flag for review to discuss, should we just mention it in our check-in so it's lumped into that whole process?
Yeah, okay, that'd be great, actually. So, because we're gonna, when we bring it to you, we'll have a red line version as well, so that.
Watch this move. You can also contact Laura directly and
Yeah.
as the city clerk, because who owns it? No, you can do that, but it may be limiting in terms of check-ins. So if you do,
I was just going to reply
there's
all
a
to
few,
a random
yeah,
email.
that's right, exactly. No, if there are some specifics, contacting Laura directly is perfectly acceptable.
Okay.
hence the OPMA training.
Reinforced, yeah.
I just, since we're going to talk about the protocol manual, I would like it to truly be a protocol manual. There's quite a bit in there that has to do with like, and here's what a council member should think about when they make a decision. And that's not protocol. Like that is, you know, like I was told my first month on city council, your only responsibility is to the residents of Bothell. They need to be your North Star. And I would like to remove, council should consider these things when making this decision. Because I don't think that is my job to tell whoever sits in this seat after me.
Noted, and I don't know, I haven't read through it with that lens, so I'm not sure that that'll be an October update, but as Laura is saying, like it's contemplated that we do a biennial update, typically following elections, and then this is a housekeeping update, but Laura has a file. She'll put that in there. We'll talk about that.
Awesome, thank you.
A question popped in my head regarding the study session format. Is it, because I'm reflecting on our conversation in January when we had the little visioning thing, there was a facilitator there that helped move the conversation. Is that something, an option that we can have, like you or Laura will, you know, facilitate the conversation?
That is one where traditionally that is the mayor. The mayor facilitates that conversation, and that's part of the role of when you select a mayor is that they're facilitating through the conversation. Now it's different because you're also a participant, and I think you probably we keep alluding to work experiences. There are times when, as a member of a team participating, it can be difficult to facilitate and have an opinion, right? But that is the intention, is that the mayor is the chair of the meeting, facilitates through the conversation. So I think some of the clarity then that can help the mayor be successful in their role is some of that's part of why OPMA training is helpful, because a lot of that actually is contemplated in, because cities across the state are doing this all the time. But also then in the protocol manual, that's where some of the things of how do things work. For example, if you were going to go to a standpoint of, we do have the working copy of the agenda that says what the estimated time boxes are. Like if you wanted to have the practice of saying, we're coming up at the projected time, just wanted to do a time check to see how much longer do we want to stay on this topic. That could be something that if the entire council wants to have happen, then that gives a signal to the mayor of make sure that you're calling that question. So that's really how it's anticipated to work. And that's not to say, I hope that didn't come across as a no, but before we changed that.
That's exactly how it came across.
Yeah, exactly. A hard no. Laura, I know, would be happy to, but no, I think that would be the discussion we'd have to have is how does that affect then the mayoral role?
Yeah, no, I'm kidding about that. That's exactly, it almost came like that way. I was talking specifically about the study session. I understand the rest of the meeting. Obviously, we have the chair, the mayor will facilitate the actual meeting. But this one, so that because we still get stuck on, can I press this thing and get called on and all that? Like you want somebody to move the conversation along. It could be the mayor if we put in the protocol, if we agree, you know. It could be the deputy mayor. It could be the deputy mayor, you know. Also, it could be the city manager. The deputy city manager. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, yeah. No, but that's just an idea for us to move along.
It's like I didn't run again. It's like I don't care. You have to do this.
Okay, well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you. So up on the screen, I'm seeing the alternate meetings. I'm not entirely clear on what that means, but I do hope that means community forums and town halls. And so I am very much looking forward to that coming back. And am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I believe Becky and Nikki are working on kind of a engagement strategy for council members. There she is. Hello. You can join us if you'd like. But yeah, that'll be coming back. So, and then the other thing is in board and commissions, the part 2, kind of implementing terms of service and defining really what are the roles and responsibilities of our boards and commissions, because they're unclear, frankly. And so we want to have a conversation about that and how they can report back to you. and what their role is. So we'll clarify that as well.
I like how the camera's panned out and everybody's in the view now. That's really cool. For the viewers on TV.
I had a question on the time, the speaker's time. Is there something in the protocol manual about that?
Yeah, I mean, it says 3 minutes, you mean for the public comment? 3 minutes, I think it says, and I don't have it in front of me, but I think it says that they can, if there's a lot of it, yeah.
I'll just read it.
There you go.
Yeah, what the protocol manual says that speakers will limit their remarks to 3 minutes unless a longer period is permitted by council. So the lack of clarity there is it for an individual or is it for all speakers? Like, would you make that decision before opening public comment to say, tonight we're going to allow 5 minutes for public comment? And I think where you'll see that out in our region sometimes happen is that like a body might allocate a certain amount of time for public comment to say, tonight we're going to have 20 minutes of our business meeting to hear from the community. And then if 20 people sign up, then you have to make a decision about how long. Or I think more often you'll see that it shrinks down of saying that like, we'll do 3 minutes, but if we had 90 people show up and you were thinking our entire council meeting will be comment, that you shorten it down to a minute, that sort of thing. But and I would read the current language. That's all it says. That and that you can't donate your time to the next speaker. So we could get to some more specificity of what that looks like. Is it for one person or is it for all? I think from a standpoint of giving people equal voice, you'd probably want to consider. That's where my brain goes to is that it's probably contemplating giving time to everyone of saying we're going to give everybody 6 minutes tonight or 4 minutes tonight or whatever it might be.
I'd like for us to have a discussion on that. I think it in the past, what I recall is it was abused when you have the 3 minute period and you have 90 people come in and speak on an important topic, or you have some people speaking, 1 or 2 or 3 people speaking, and that's it. And they're feeling they would like a little more time. So I think it's a discussion for us to have. I'm not positive what he was referring to, that it's in our about an extra 2 minutes or whatever, but I just want to make sure that at least I understand what he was referring to.
Well, we'll research that. Haven't found a specific reference as I looked at either in the municipal code or into the protocol manual. I think that is the section, and so the ability to extend does exist through that one sentence statement.
There was something, I wish I could give it its proper credit on where either someone told me or I read it in for another city. But when there is a large group that turns out, giving that group an option to choose a designated speaker and give that designated speaker, say, 5, 7 minutes, whatever it is to speak, and allowing that community to either physically get up and go stand behind the person who's speaking so they make that impact of this is the community, but choosing a designated speaker that they trust that can articulate well what they're caring about, but still keep it manageable where we don't have 90 times 3 minutes. It would be nice to throw out to the community an option of if there's X number of you and you want to choose one designated speaker, that designated speaker has 5-6 minutes to speak. And they might prefer someone who's very articulate who just goes through and makes the presentation. So it's an idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we could definitely look at that. I've actually worked for cities that had that before, so when big items, they've done that.
Or like a set amount of time for public comment for pro and con on a particular issue, like is something that I've seen as well at different cities. And I believe another B city right down the street from us has something similar to that, where, you know, there can only be either so many people per side or so many speakers per side, so that we, you know, just on those popular issues, we don't have 40 people coming and spending 3 minutes saying largely the same thing.
Yeah, can I say something to that? I'm just going to admit my human frailty. There can be a large number of people coming to speak for something, and they've got me. They have my sympathy and my attention. But the fact that they get up and repeat each other, I have to do an attitude check of, it doesn't feel respectful to council's time when that happens, and I have to do an attitude check of, look, I'm sympathetic. You have my sympathy, but you need to stop because I'm getting exhausted here because we have a 290-page agenda packet that we've got to go through. So if we can give the community tools to speak and just keep things moving forward, then I would struggle less.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I would hesitate to sort of lump people together. Even just in my short, almost 1 year on this body, I've seen people sort of get their neighbors worked up about stuff, and then they come here and they hear the facts. And I've been in a meeting with someone where I've read out from what's proposed, and they're like, person A was like, well, I brought my neighbor person B, and we're very upset. And then talking through it, person B was like, oh, that's fine. That's not what I thought this was. So I don't necessarily want to say that let's give a big group of people a chance to sort of not have their say, because people might say in their own comment what they don't like about it, and it may be that that's solvable or not actually on the table for whatever reason. So I don't actually like the idea of grouping people together. I think that it stifles conversations that we could have with people when they say what their issue is or what they do or don't like about something. So I appreciate wanting the meetings to be shorter, but I wouldn't want that to be at the expense of people not having a chance to say what's on their mind.
Well, I totally agree, and I think that it's important to put some options out
Hey
there.
now.
Sorry, I did not see. I would look.
It's
Sorry.
all good. So this brings back big time memories when Wayne Golf Course came up. Big time. And it was when the people didn't have their voice heard. They couldn't get up and speak because they shortened meeting times. So I would just be cautious when we talk about limiting people's voice, because if they come here and they want to get up at that podium and they want to speak, we need to let them speak, because they took the time out of their day to come. So that's all. I mean, yes, we need to figure out how we can manage our meeting, but if somebody comes down here and wants to speak for 3 minutes or whatever we decide we want to give them, it's important for them to be able to get up and have their voice heard. I can't stress that enough, because I've seen the other side of it.
I agree with that. I was thinking the same thing. I know some other cities do 30 minutes, and like however many people you can get through in 30 minutes is it, or they'll separate sides of something, an issue, and give each side the same amount of time. But like Councilmember McNeil said, I feel like we need to give people the opportunity to speak to us and do so in public if they want to. And they're going to take 3 minutes, you know, to come down here and give us 3 minutes of what their thoughts are. I think we owe it to them to listen. And same likewise now with Zoom. If they are making time in their day to log into Zoom, wait patiently, and they want to say something for 3 minutes, I think we have an obligation to hear it and listen to it. And as long as it's respectful, you know, there's limits to that, but I think most people are going to be respectful, and they're just going to tell us what they think and how they feel. And we need to hear that and internalize it and listen to it and respond to it. So I'm not for capping those things. I think if a group comes down together and they want to appoint one person to speak and that's their choice to do that, and they all get behind it, great. I know some people don't like to get up and speak, but they still want their voice heard. But I don't like to limit who can speak and the number of people speaking on.
May I make a suggestion? It sounds like an agenda item for next time that we have a discussion, because there are different ways to handle this situation. And I hope that one day we're going to get 90 people to show up over here, and we'll actually have this problem, because today we don't even have that problem.
To that point, I wanted to bring us back to like where this conversation actually started, was for clarity on how do we extend people's time, not how do we restrict people's time. So just for that note is that this conversation is morphed, but again, just think about when somebody might be tracking along at home, of getting us back to the original point was if there's an extension of that 3 minutes. And I think that from the standpoint of when you start getting into scenarios and you think about like what should people expect for, I think you'll see it too at meetings where decisions are made to shorten the individual speaker's time to get as many speakers in. Like anytime you change what's standard, what we publish, you're shifting people's ability. And I want to acknowledge it's not comfortable to come down and speak on a timer. So when we whether you're extending or you're shortening it, anything that's different. But if we say it's 3 minutes and you're prepared for 3 minutes, and we give the option of you can also send a written comments, you can leave your notes, you can do all sorts of things, and that will be distributed to all council members for consideration. I think that's the clear as kind principle kind of wins out here too, of like you want to have a standard rule and you want to be consistent, would be my advice. If you want to, again, there's been some conversation about some other things we can do in the extreme, but ultimately what was before us was the question about what do you do if somebody is seeking additional opportunity to speak.
I just wanted to say, I have frequently said, when you don't listen to people, you don't make them go away, they just get angry, and it's very important to listen to people. My only comment is maybe a tool in the toolbox is to give people options on how they present. The other part that we need to talk about is that when we do have 90 people come, and we want to stay within a certain time frame, that may be a meeting where we just don't talk about some agenda bills. They go to the next week.
I've also seen where if you have 90 people show up, instead of giving each person 3 minutes, you could say, well, there's a lot of people here, we want to hear from more people, so by nodding of hands, raising of hand, whatever, are you okay with each taking 1 minute so we can hear more from more people, or like a minute and a half, something like that, just as a suggestion to throw out there. But from what Kyle read in the manual, I'd like to understand better what an additional request of time means. Because I wouldn't necessarily interpret what was in there that way. So if that could come back, we could better understand it. Thank you.
Not about timing, but I would love 10 minutes after public comment too, especially if we get 90 people, but even just a normal public comment period where we can go follow up with folks. There were people today who shared really personal things that I would have loved to go and thank them for sharing with us, or, and that happens pretty regularly. So following up with people who accept proclamations, whatever it is. So not to make the meetings longer, because I realize we were just talking about how they're too long, but I think it's important that we get that chance to talk to people, because it is understandable that some people might go home and eat dinner instead of hanging out until the first break.
I think the other tool that you have in your arsenal there too is asking staff to make sure that we're doing that. I know I've seen that happen. Our deputy city manager does that. Our assistant city manager does that. I've seen folks from the clerk's office do that. So if we want to be attuned to that, making sure that it's happening, that's an alternative way too of keeping going through. And again, being
and I've seen numerous staff out there doing it. That's awesome. I think I also sometimes would just like to thank people, because people do give a lot of themselves sometimes in public comment.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you bringing that up. Thank you. Because we have had a sort of hit and miss of whether we do that or not. But I find it very meaningful when we do have a chance to at the end of public comment, to just take a break, go into the audience, check in with people, kind of thing. And I think tonight was a particularly relevant time to do that, and we missed the opportunity. So it would have been very nice to have done that.
If we do that in this setting, are we okay? If 4 of us are standing there talking?
Yeah, I think you'd need to recess the meeting, and then again, you're not where you
Just want to ask the question
Yeah.
because I want to make sure that.
Yeah, I mean, so that'll be a good OPMA training question, but I mean, I think in general of, again, if the conversation is around, I heard you, appreciate you coming out. If it's a, great, what can I do? Like if it starts tending into action, that's where, but, so there's like a good consultant, it depends. Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, people can wonder what happened.
And one of the things on the proposed agenda order that was attachment 1 in your packet was moving public comment up before reports, so that, you know, if somebody does come and says something, you could say, okay, well, we'll have the city manager or staff reach out to you and, you know, kind of at least address them a little bit before, you know, at least publicly address that, yes, we heard you. We'll have the city manager or staff, you know, reach out to you or let them at least, yeah. And that's one of the reasons why we decided, we think it'd be better moved up in the agenda. And that is all I have. So we will bring something back for adoption. We'll take all this and thank you for your feedback, and we'll put it in a agenda bill for adoption. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Next up, we have council conversations, as it happens.
I have one. It's good to see everybody's faces again after being and you look reasonably well rested. I did not find this. This came from a former city council member. And you know how Seattle Times has raves and rants? There was a rave about us, so I'll just read it. It was in the Times. Rave to the Bothell firefighter who, as our neighbor's house was being destroyed by flames, worked so hard and so smartly through the night to keep the surrounding trees from catching fire and other homes with them. They are true heroes. And if you missed it like I did, it was a good thing to hear.
I was going to say you should all have in your inboxes an invite to an in-person event for everybody for the the K4C, King County Cities Climate Collaboration. Say that fast. In-person shindig in October. So I'm guessing we should maybe let you know if we're going. So if we have more than 4, blah, blah, blah. But you're all invited.
All right.
I just like took that from you.
And now a word from Councilmember Alders.
There's also, this was in your email as well, an invitation to the Together Center grand opening in Redmond that is coming up. And so that one, definitely RSVP and, you know, make sure that we are publicly announcing it if more than 4 is going to be attending. Thank you.
Okay, I need you to write that down because I want to go to both those things. All right. Anybody else? All right, we are going to adjourn to executive session regarding potential litigation pursuant to RCW 4230-110-1G, anticipated to last 30 minutes with no action expected. The meeting will adjourn at 9:43 p.m. And we will adjourn directly from executive session.
Thank you. And it will be in 107, 108 because we have some audio issues in that room, and it'll be a virtual meeting, virtual attendees. 107, 108. Yep. Thank you.